The moon shone, cloaking the giant crocodile in its light. From a distance, it almost looked like the boat was alive and doing breathing exercises, absorbing the quintessence of the moon. At the same time, the moonlight seemed to grow more intense as it flowed into the boat, then streamed out into the area. Su Qing just looked at it for a while. Whether it was his time in the slums or his life in the scavenger base camp, he had always had simple accommodations. The only exception was the house Sergeant Thunder had given him. As for this little canopy boat that looked like a crocodile, as it sparkled in the moonlight, it looked so impressive that Su Qing couldn't help but kneel down and put his hand on it. It was cold, but clearly made of quality materials. Most importantly, "It's mine," he murmured. Then he prepared to step aboard until a cold flicker ran through his eyes and he stopped. He had suddenly sensed evil eyes gazing at him. Whoever it was, they were well hidden, and Su Qing had no way of identifying their location. Remaining calm, he casually looked down at his hemp sandals. They were old and tattered, caked with both mud and dried blood. Through the gaps in the material, he could see his dirty toes. After some thought, he removed his sandals and stepped into the sea water, washing his feet until his fair skin was clearly visible. During the entire process, he remained completely calm. However, he was also observing his surroundings and waiting for whoever was watching him to step out into the open. The person seemed cautious, though, and remained hidden even when Su Qing pretended to be lazy and off guard. Expression the same as ever, Su Qing finally stepped into the boat and looked at the area under the canopy. It wasn't very large, and it was simply furnished. There was a bed, a woven rush mat, and a wash basin. The area inside wasn't very tall. In fact, an average person wouldn't be able to stand up inside, but it was more than adequate for sitting. Su Qing examined the interior but didn't go inside. Instead, he sat on the deck looking out at the waves and feeling the sensation of the boat bobbing up and down. It was peaceful, and eventually his eyes seemed to lose focus, as though his thoughts were drifting. As he sat there, he recalled his struggle to survive in the slums. He thought about the little bedroom he holed up in and how cold it was at night. In fact, during winter, the wind was so cold he'd often wondered if he would wake up the next day. It wasn't uncommon back then for people to freeze to death during the nights. That was why he feared the cold. Or maybe it wasn't that he feared the cold, just his memories of it. As he sat quietly on the deck, he looked at the moon and thought back to the first person he'd ever killed years ago. That person had been starving and wanted to kill Su Qing and eat him. A fight broke out, and though it was a huge struggle, Su Qing managed to kill him first. Then he cut his head off and put it outside the door to his room. From then on, people looked at him differently. As his boat bobbed up and down in the water, Su Qing recalled that event and thought, should I do the same thing again? He suddenly leaned backward, and a cold stream of light shot right in front of him. Upon dodging the light, the faraway look in his eyes vanished. It had been an act the entire time, and now, the true coldness within him stabbed out. "You finally showed yourself," he growled. The water next to the boat erupted as a man shot out, heading directly toward Su Qing, cold light glittering in his right hand. It was a dagger, and even in the moonlight, it was possible to see that it was covered in poison. Su Qing quickly assessed his assailant. It was a fellow disciple in a gray Taoist robe. He wore no face covering, so it was possible to see that he was about 30 years old. Though he was only in the 5th level of qi condensation, Su Qing could sense that he was dangerous. The disciple had a vicious expression, and his eyes abounded with killing intent. He moved with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, his dagger was closing in on Su Qing's chest. Su Qing's eyes glittered coldly as he ignored the dagger, and instead thrust out his right hand to grab the man's arm. Unleashing the power of his body cultivation, he lifted the man bodily into the air. The man's eyes went wide with disbelief, as Su Qing then slammed him onto the deck of the boat. A muffled thud rang out. At the same time, blood showered left and right as a gory tentacle erupted from the man's torso, splashing slime as it whipped toward Su Qing. Shockingly, the tentacle's aura surpassed the 5th level of qi condensation and was in the 6th. Su Qing's face remained expressionless as the spectral hobgoblin appeared behind him and crushed the tentacle. Another boom rang out as the tentacle exploded. Upon losing the tentacle, the cultivator coughed up a heap of blood and his face turned ashen. He tried to struggle, but Su Qing used his free hand to relieve the man of his dagger, then shoved the weapon up to his throat. The cold dagger pierced the skin a bit. With only minimal effort, Su Qing could slice the man's throat open. The cultivator shivered, looking at Su Qing with terror in his eyes. "How did you hide yourself so well?" Su Qing asked coldly. "And what was that tentacle?" It was an octopus arm I transplanted onto myself. It boosts battle prowess and covers my aura when I'm in the water. Lots of people in the sect graft mutant beast parts onto themselves. Look, junior brother, I can make all of this up to you. I don't have a lot of merit points, but I can take a mission tomorrow and... Su Qing slashed him through the throat with the dagger. The man's eyes went wide, but before he could scream, Su Qing clamped his hand over his mouth. Meanwhile, blood poured out onto the deck of the Dharma boat. After a few breaths of time, the man went still. Su Qing looked at the mess on the deck and frowned. Taking out some corpse-ravaging powder, he sprinkled it on the corpse to dissolve it. During the entire time, no other disciples showed their faces in the area. Perhaps things like this were so common that nobody cared. As the sea breeze caused the smell of salt and blood to fill the area, Su Qing looked through the man's sack. It was completely empty. He was after my Dharma boat. Su Qing suddenly thought back to how the round-faced cultivator had mentioned disciples mysteriously going missing all the time. Patting his iron skewer, he looked around with cold eyes, then took out the brocade box and pulled out the jade slip with the description of the boat. After studying it, he looked at the boat, his eyes glittering. This boat is spectacular. Extending his right hand, he smacked the deck and, following the instructions in the jade slip, sent spirit power pouring out. By doing so, he created a sealing mark which settled onto the deck. The boat shuddered as though powering up. Su Qing then bit his finger and extracted a drop of blood, which he used to draw a simple magical symbol on the deck. As he did, the boat trembled, and at the same time, he felt his mind bonding with the boat. As the jade slip described, that was the boat acknowledging a new owner. Now, Su Qing would be able to operate the boat by merely thinking about it, as if it were an extension of his body. He issued another thought, and a glowing defensive shield appeared, covering the craft from one end to the other. Only at that point did Su Qing finally feel safe. Looking back down at the jade slip, he reviewed all the information about the boat and committed it to memory. 7 Blood Eyes Dharma boats really did have the capacity to grow with their owners. Disciples could customize their speed, defenses, attack capabilities, and special functions. Those 4 things could be upgraded one at a time, or simultaneously. It depended on the whims and resources of the owner. The speed, defenses, and attack capabilities were easy to understand. As for the special functions, they referred to general magical techniques, as well as the ability of the boat to go underwater, to fly in the air, or change the form and appearance of the boat. In terms of the special functions, or the other 3 categories, the biggest determining factor in dealing with them was the material used for the upgrades. In most cases, 7th Peak disciples had 2 options when it came to the structure of their boat. The first was man-made materials. By upgrading materials and to allow for higher-level spell formations, it was possible to make the boat tougher and more durable. Doing that required working with disciples from the 6th Peak. Furthermore, developing the boat in that way often required dealing with limitations in human ingenuity. Still, it was an option many disciples picked. It was also a relatively safe method. All one had to do was follow the general pattern that had been laid forth. As for the second method, you can use mutated organisms to alter the structure of the boat. Then you don't need spell formations created by people. As the Jade slip explained, mutated organisms had natural spell formations built into them. Such spell formations with extraordinary natural functions were referred to as forbidden arrays. Mutant beasts were all built differently. They all had different forms and different powers. Both methods will require a lot of effort and resources. As he reviewed the Jade slip, Su Qing had to admit that 7 Blood Eyes was a terrifying organization. After all, as a brand new disciple, all he had been able to purchase was a Class 1 boat. The watercraft of the 7th Peak were classified as either boats, skiffs, ships, or cruisers. Furthermore, each of those 4 types was divided into 10 classes. The Jade slip also indicated that there was something else beyond the cruiser level. It was called a dreadnought. Each level upgrade costs a lot of resources. Su Qing wasn't able to calculate the details, but based on what he could tell, it was a shocking level of wealth. Putting down the Jade slip, he sat there in a daze for a short time. Then he looked down at his sack and bag of holding. Unfortunately, he just didn't have enough in either of them. I need to figure out a way to make money. I have 1 month before I have to pay rent on my berth. With that, he took out another Jade slip and began to study it. This slip contained information about the 7th Peak technique, which he was forbidden from sharing with outsiders. It was called the Sea-Forming Scripture. As an apex power in South Phoenix, Seven Blood Eyes had techniques that were very impressive in both their ability to extrude mutagen and in how strong they made the practitioner. The techniques of other smaller groups and clans simply couldn't compare. In fact, two people with the same cultivation base, but with different techniques, could be as different as a firefly and a burning. After studying it, Su Qing inhaled deeply. Now he knew why the Seven Blood Eyes disciples he encountered seemed so dangerous despite having low cultivation bases. The type of technique was everything. For instance, the sea-forming scripture had 10 levels that corresponded to the 10 levels of qi condensation. In order to cultivate the technique, one had to be near the sea. In fact, being out at sea was even better. Each level involved absorbing the aura of the sea, then using it to cultivate a 30-meter-wide spirit sea. At the 10th level, which was the Great Circle, the spirit sea would reach 300 meters in size. Disciples who cultivated the sea-forming scripture would have spirit power that surpassed other cultivators by many times over. That, in turn, would allow them to utilize many more magical techniques in battle, and would naturally provide a huge boost to battle prowess. Even more miraculous, their spirit sea would have the aura of the Forbidden Sea in it. Thus, when they fought an opponent, they would naturally exude an intense mental pressure that would weaken the enemy. In fact, in the qi condensation level, someone with the aura of the Forbidden Sea in their spirit sea would surpass anyone else in the same level. The sea and mountain incantation is a body cultivation technique. My spectral hobgoblin is already at the level of the Great Circle, making me like someone in the Great Circle of qi condensation. That said, when stacked up against other high-level techniques, that Great Circle is actually rather weak. On the other hand, because I have no mutagen in me, and because of the blessing of the violet crystal, my version of the 7th level of the sea and mountain incantation is already able to unleash the spectral hobgoblin, which normally comes with the Great Circle. In other words, I already have battle prowess as strong as the Great Circle. In the final analysis, the sea and mountain incantation can't compare at all to the sea-forming scripture. One is body cultivation, the other is cultivation magic. Yet again, Su Qing thought back to what the round-faced cultivator had told him. A moment later, a look of determination appeared in Su Qing's eyes. Furthermore, he noticed that the description of the sea-forming scripture indicated that there wasn't an upper limit to the final size of the spirit sea. People had different constitutions, and also, their levels of mutagen would be different. The less mutagen one had, the larger the spirit sea could grow. According to the records kept by Seven Blood Eyes, the highest level ever attained by someone in the Great Circle of Qi condensation was a fully 60-year cycle in the past, when someone had a spirit sea that was 810 meters. That person was none other than the current peak lord of the 7th peak. Seeing that, Su Qing's eyes hardened as he thought about the fact that he had no mutagen in him. If I cultivate the sea-forming scripture to the Great Circle, how big will my spirit sea become? Intense anticipation built within Su Qing. If mutagen continued to be no problem for him, then his upper limit would be determined by what his body could handle. And because he had terrifying powers of recovery, his endurance was naturally immense. Su Qing's eyes shone with unprecedented brightness. Furthermore, it wasn't lost on him that the sea-forming scripture wasn't about body refinement. His fight with the Golden Vajra warrior sect had left him with a deep understanding of the inherent flaws in pure body cultivation. Therefore, it was without the slightest hesitation that he committed all the details of the technique to memory, then closed his eyes and started cultivating it. As he did, a wind kicked up around his boat, and the water rippled as spirit power infused with the aura of the Forbidden Sea, as well as mutagen, rushed in his direction. The defensive shield around his boat would block magical techniques, but it didn't stop pure spirit power. It poured in, entering his body through the pores in countless fine threads. Because he didn't have any mutagen in him, the spirit power rushed through his meridians without any obstacles. He was like a dried-up sea sponge absorbing water. The spirit power simply poured inside, heading to his Danshan region, where it slowly built up. As he continued with his cultivation, he sensed that the sea and mountain incantation was being stirred into action by the sea-forming scripture. However, the meridians used by the two techniques were different, so he suppressed the sea and mountain incantation. However, the sea and mountain incantation seemed to tremble with desire, so eventually he stopped suppressing it. Instantly, the sea and mountain incantation surged into operation, causing the spirit power influx to dramatically increase. As it converged in his Danshan region, the spirit sea there began to expand. That came as a big surprise to Su Qing. The two techniques seemed to be working together. The sea and mountain incantation wasn't competing with the sea-forming scripture, but rather was helping it. Seeing no reason not to, Su Qing let his energy and blood swell, causing the spectral hobgoblin to appear. The hobgoblin threw its head back and roared noiselessly, lifting its hands as if it were transporting a sea. As a result, the spirit power of the forbidden sea flowed with even more force. Su Qing's shock. The spirit sea in his Danshan region was already 30 meters from side to side. He had already completed the first level of the sea-forming scripture. Then a tremor passed through him as, before he even realized what was going on, he moved to the second level. And then, the second level reached its own great circle. This fast, without the slightest hesitation, he moved on to the third level. Inside of him, the spirit sea grew and grew, 63 meters, 66 meters, 69 meters. As he continued, the spirit power outside his boat created a vortex. The wind whipped, and the waves grew so large that the guards on the shore looked over. They looked surprised. Which freakish disciple is working on their cultivation? They're absorbing spirit power at such a rapid rate. As they watched in shock, the vortex spun larger and larger, causing the surface of the bay to ripple even more wildly. Many of the boats were rocking up and down so much that the disciples inside looked out with cold frowns. However, their expressions quickly turned into those of surprise. What's going on? The vortex kept growing. Inside his boat, Su Qing trembled as his spirit sea pushed past the 90-meter mark and reached 111. And it kept going. 117, 120. Su Qing opened his eyes, and they glittered with brilliant violet light. Sea-forming scripture, 4th level. Deathblade's thoughts. Okay, this chapter is actually on the long end and I considered splitting it, but nah, screw it. No split chapters until later on. That night, Su Qing cultivated the sea-forming scripture, achieving multiple breakthroughs and eventually reaching the 4th level. It was a somewhat ridiculous progress speed, and it caused all the surrounding 7th peak disciples to be shocked. That said, 7th peak disciples were known for keeping their true abilities hidden. Therefore, after realizing that Su Qing's boat was new to the area, indicating he was a newly promoted disciple, most of them went back into their own boats and didn't pay any further attention. Of course, in reality, they were all making inquiries trying to find out more information about who this new disciple was. It was when the sun finally peeked over the horizon in the morning, casting its light over the sea, that Su Qing opened his eyes. Violet light spilled out, and it lasted for a few dozen breaths of time before fading away. It left behind a look of shock. As the night had progressed, Su Qing's progress slowed, and he only made one more breakthrough, leaving him in the 5th level of the sea-forming scripture. Even still, that level of progress surpassed anything he could have predicted would happen. The sea and mountain incantation worked together with the sea-forming scripture, he thought incredulously. He looked different compared to the day before. The sharp angles on his face were now a bit softer, and there was something about him that seemed purer. That was the aura brought by the sea-forming scripture. Upon sensing the 150-meter spirit sea within him, Su Qing thought back to the saying associated with the sea and mountain incantation. Goblins can move mountains, hobgoblins can transport seas. However, based on his analysis, he was fairly certain his astounding progress had less to do with the sea and mountain incantation, and more to do with the complete lack of mutagen in his meridians. He was like a well-forged receptacle. It simply didn't make sense to compare him to someone who had just started practicing cultivation. It was only logical that he blasted through the early stages because of the large amounts of spirit power pouring into him. That also explained why he had slowed down during the last half of the night. There were limits to what that well-forged receptacle could hold. That said, I did achieve one more breakthrough. There's a limit to my speed, but I should still be able to advance relatively quickly. As he pondered everything, his eyes shone. He hadn't just made progress with the sea-forming scripture during the night. He had also made some advancement in the sea and mountain incantation. He was now very close to the 8th level. Most importantly, each level of the sea-forming scripture came with magical techniques. Looking down at his right hand, Su Qing sent forth a thought and watched as a drop of seawater suddenly formed on his palm. In the blink of an eye, it became a ball of water as large as a human head. Then it transformed into the shape of a flying dagger, then a shield, and then a bird. The ball of water continued to transform, the amount of water changing depending on what item it formed. Each one was a different weight and had a different level of power. Within the jade slip for the technique, There were over 100 different transformations between all 10 levels. They all emanated a frigid coldness as well as the aura of the Forbidden Sea, which would be very intimidating to enemy opponents. But they weren't just intimidating, they were downright mighty. The ball of water had so much explosive power in it that he could easily overwhelm any of the scavengers he'd met in the 5th level of Qi condensation. Based on what Su Qing could tell, it would take no more than 40 of these balls of water to kill the old version of himself in battle. And right now, with this 150-meter spirit sea, he could create 50 balls of water. When you added in all the transformations, that was a level of power that, even now, could be deadly if someone used it against him, though he would certainly last longer in such a fight than the old version of himself. Perhaps it was a bit exaggerated, but he had already cultivated the sea and mountain incantation to 70% completion, yet he was already as strong as someone in the 10th level of that technique. In other words, an ordinary person who cultivated the sea and mountain incantation to the 10th level would still have trouble killing a 7th peak disciple who'd cultivated the sea-forming scripture to the 5th level. This gave Su Qing an even greater appreciation for 7 blood eyes, as well as the fighting abilities of 7th peak disciples. Rogue cultivators aren't even remotely on the same level as disciples from a sect. Right now, it would only take the new me a few minutes to kill the old version of me. Although his cultivation base had not grown significantly, his battle prowess had increased a lot. In fact, he felt almost like he was walking a different path than before. As the dawn sun filtered into his boat, it made his shadow clearly visible on the deck. He looked down at it. During his night of cultivation, his shadow had absorbed all of the mutagen he had taken into himself. The shadow looked even darker than before, and when you looked at it closely, it resembled a deep abyss. As Su Qing stared, the shadow's arms moved. Then it flexed its fingers before forming a fist, then went back and forth between those two postures. It could also shrink and stretch rapidly in very Gruish fashion. After a moment, a wave of exhaustion swept through Su Qing, but he recovered almost instantly. After that second phase of the assessment, and my breakthroughs with the sea-forming scripture, my control over my shadow is increasing dramatically. With that, Su Qing looked out at the sun in the sky. And he slowly got to his feet, arranged his belongings, and took out his Taoist robe. Putting it on the table, he straightened out the folds. Waving his hand, he formed a drop of water, then turned it into a sphere and finally transformed it into a mirror. Looking at himself, he saw a delicate and even pretty face, dashing and charming. His skin was smudged, but his eyes glittered like bright stars. After examining himself, a look of determination appeared on his face, and he took off his scavenger clothes, revealing the impressive physique he had developed with the sea and mountain incantation. Waving his hand at the mirror, he pulled it toward him, while simultaneously transforming it into a rushing stream of water vapor. As it washed over him, it removed all the muck and grime, creating a pool of dirty water at his feet. It was the first time in about 7 years that he had thoroughly washed. The reason was that his environment had changed. In the slums and the scavenger base camp, being dirty made him look like everyone else. But here, that look would attract unwanted attention. After what happened on his Dharma boat the previous night, he knew that people would have a hard time believing that he was poor. He let the water run down his face and hair, revealing his fair skin. After all the filth was gone, he opened his eyes. The sun shone through the canopy of his boat, landing on his hair and face, and it seemed to remember him with longing, as if it hoped to never leave him. It felt a bit uncomfortable to Su Qing, so he backed up into the shadows. His hair was long and black. He looked like he was about 16 or 17, with dramatically angled eyebrows, black eyes, thin lips, and a strong profile. He was tall and slender, like a young eagle that wanted to spread its wings in the night. He seemed cold, lonely, and intimidating, but at the same time had a bit of the immaturity of a young person. However, that only served to make him more dashing. After looking at his hands for a moment, he took the gray Taoist robe and started putting on the various pieces, starting with the inner garment. He put on the shoes provided by the sect, then put on the outer part of the robe. Then he summoned another ball of water to clean the bloodstains off the deck of his boat. When he finally stepped out into the open, he looked like a completely different person. He was like a gem that had been covered with dirt, but finally cleansed. Quite a few of the patrolling guards looked over at him in surprise. His eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar sensation of the sun shining directly onto his skin. However, he soon opened his eyes wide, realizing that he had to get used to it quickly. After a while, he took a deep breath and stepped off of his boat. Waving his hand, he sucked the boat back into the bottle and then walked off. Later today, he had to report in to the Violent Crimes Division. He also wanted to find a medicine shop in the Port District, as he needed to buy some medicinal plants to make white boluses and poison powder. After all, he had long since run out of ingredients. Despite how early it was, the port was already busy. Both trader ships and Seventh Peak disciples sailed in and out of the various harbors, creating a very bustling atmosphere. Many shops had already opened their doors, and the pedestrians were hurrying to and fro. Su Qing's physical appearance attracted many eyes. That said, to cultivators, good looks were like a mask, and thus most people simply glanced at him then looked away. Su Qing felt like he was getting used to this place. However, he still preferred to stick to the shadows. As he headed toward the Violent Crimes Division, he looked around to see what shops were open. He saw places that sold weapons and places that specialized in spell formations. Thanks to the information in the Dharma boat Jade slip, he knew that not all disciples could personally upgrade their own boats. Most of them would collect the materials required, then take them to shops run by disciples from the 5th or 6th peak to do the work. After browsing some of the shops, Su Qing asked around to determine the exact location of the Violent Crimes Division. Before long, he found himself in front of a very large building complex. The front gate reminded him of the city magistrate's manor, but inside, it was a lot bigger. There were dozens of smaller structures inside, and of course, the entire place radiated an intense pressure. The entire complex was pitch black. On either side of the front gate were vicious stone statues that looked like Rakshasa demons. The area around the front gate was icy cold, such that passing pedestrians made sure to avoid it. There were 2 young cultivators in gray robes attending the front gate, one male and one female. Both seemed to be in their 20s and were very good-looking. They lounged next to the gate, yawning as if they needed sleep. When Su Qing approached, they looked up at him. Su Qing kept a neutral expression on his face as he approached, stopping a short distance away to clasp hands and bow. Disciple Su Qing from the 7th peak, reporting for duty. A newbie, the young man said, his eyes glittering as he looked Su Qing up and down. Sensing the extraordinary fluctuations rolling off of Su Qing, he was about to continue talking when the female disciple pushed him aside and walked right up to Su Qing. Flashing a pretty smile, she said, "What business do you have here, little junior brother?" "He said he's reporting for duty," the young man said with a deadpan smile. "Why are you asking him what he's doing here?" The girl ignored him as she continued to look at Su Qing. Su Qing instinctively took a few steps back. He didn't like being very close to people, and what was more, he wanted to observe these 2 for a moment. Most of all, he needed to get a good look at their throats. After realizing that both of these people seemed to be in the 6th level of qi condensation, Su Qing determined that they weren't a huge threat. Given his current level of battle prowess, he could kill them if it came down to that. As a result, he felt a bit more relaxed. Sensing Su Qing's eyes on him, the young man rubbed his nose and then tried to make himself look a bit more imposing. There was something about this newbie that was different from ordinary newbies. The female cultivator seemed to sense the same thing. Her eyes narrowing in curiosity, she licked her lips and said to the young man, "You keep an eye on the gate. I'll take this little junior brother inside." Then a beautiful smile appeared on her face as she beckoned at Su Qing to follow her into the Violent Crimes Division. "Come with me, little junior brother." "Thank you," Su Qing said. The young man simply nodded. "So the tramp is trying to get a new boy toy. Well, this brat might seem different than the usual new recruits, but I'd be surprised if he lasts 3 months in the Violent Crimes Division." Upon entering the complex, Su Qing kept some distance between himself and the young woman. Walking through the main courtyard, he saw a host of other disciples clad, like himself, in gray robes. At the minimum, they had cultivation bases in the 5th or 6th level of qi condensation. But there was no shortage of people in the 7th or 8th level. Some seemed cold and detached, others warm and gentle. Some reeked of blood, others walked around with their arms full of ordinary office supplies. Taking it all in, he didn't see anything that made the place seem like one cohesive department. What was more, everyone seemed to keep their distance from each other. Walking along silently, Su Qing glanced at the throat of each passing cultivator and tried to judge whether or not his current level of battle prowess was enough to kill them. That was simply instinct by now. Before long, he felt the need to keep his guard up more than ever. That was because he had trouble finding people he knew he could kill, and saw quite a few who seemed extremely threatening. Simultaneously, He was paying attention to the layout of the place and was starting to get an idea of its general structure. Suddenly, the young woman leading him turned around and took a step toward him. "Little junior brother, why do you seem so fond of looking at other people's throats?" As the words left her mouth, she reached out to touch his chest. But then, her expression flickered and she lunged backward while simultaneously taking out a generic antidote pill that she consumed. Then she looked at Su Qing, her expression serious. "I don't like people getting too close to me," Su Qing said, looking at her calmly. She gave him a deep look, nodded, and then abandoned her previous plans for him. By now, she realized that there was a lot more to this new recruit than met the eye. "Interesting," she said. "Someone like you should be able to last a long time in the violent crimes division." With that, she continued leading him, and this time he didn't need to maintain distance between the two of them. She took the initiative to stay away from him, nor did she attempt any more conversation. After taking him past 7 or 8 buildings and through a number of different pathways, she stopped in front of a very large hall. Its exterior was pitch black, which created a stark contrast to the sunshine outside. Looking very serious, she raised her voice and said, "Director, we have a new recruit reporting for duty. His name is Su Qing." Su Qing kept a similar serious expression on his face as he stood there with his head bowed. Deep inside the grand hall, 2 bright lights appeared like burning lamps. They were eyes, and their gaze pierced out of the hall and landed on Su Qing. Feeling the gaze land on him, Su Qing shivered at the sense of immense pressure. It was like whoever was in that hall was a vicious beast whose mere presence could suffocate a person. Su Qing's hair stood on end, and he had trouble breathing. Without even thinking about it, his right hand inched to his side, and he tensed in preparation to take action. Thankfully, the gaze retracted, whereupon Su Qing breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he sensed an immense force wrap around the identity medallion in his left hand and pull it away. With a whoosh, it disappeared into the hall. He knew he couldn't have fought back against that level of force. In fact, he had the feeling that if the force wrapped around him and not his identity medallion, then he would be inside that hall right now. Beads of sweat broke out on his forehead. A moment later, a cold voice echoed out from inside. "Go report in to Celestial Bureau, Unit 6. Along with the words, his identity medallion flew back out from within the hall, along with some sort of badge. Su Qing reached up to catch the medallion and badge. When they hit his hand, he felt so much force behind them that his torso swayed backward, and he was forced to put one foot back to steady himself. His reaction caused the eyes in the hall to brighten momentarily. However, no words accompanied them. Then the eyes closed. When the female disciple saw Su Qing simply catch the medallion and badge, her pupils constricted. "He's more cautious than many old-timers in the sect, and he's so strong." She blinked a few times. Before, she'd sensed that Su Qing was someone she shouldn't provoke and had thus decided to keep her distance from him. But now she changed her mind. This was a person she should make friends with. "Junior brother Su Qing, I'm very familiar with Unit 6. I'll take you there." She also made a gesture to him indicating that he should put on the badge. Su Qing took a deep breath, put the badge on, then clasped hands and bowed in the direction of the grand hall. He also offered thanks to the young woman. Su Qing was young, but he had years of experience in life and had long since learned to read people. He could guess the reason why this female disciple's attitude had suddenly changed. His judgment was correct. As the girl led him along, she provided a self-introduction. "Junior brother, I'm Su Yanhong from Earth Bureau, Unit 9. By chance, I was assigned to watch duty at the main gate today. I guess it's just destiny that the two of us met." As Su Yanhong led him through the violent crimes division, she pointed out different buildings and explained what they were. "That's the deputy director's office. It extends to that building as well." "Elder Sister Su," he asked, "how many deputy directors are there in the violent crimes division?" Upon hearing Su Qing call her elder sister, the girl smiled and went into an explanation. "There's 1 director and 4 deputy directors. They lead the 4 bureaus of Heaven, Earth, Celestial, and Terrestrial. Each bureau has 9 street units. You're assigned to Celestial Bureau, Unit 6. You actually got lucky. The deputy director of Celestial Bureau spends most of his time in seclusion, so you won't see him often. In other words, you'll be able to relax a bit." Eventually, she had led Su Qing to the Celestial Bureau, which was in the southwestern part of the Violent Crimes Division compound. There were a few dozen buildings there, with numerous cultivators about, hustling and bustling. The bureaus maintained a high level of security, and thus Su Yanhong didn't go inside. Before sending him through the entrance, she gave him her contact information, then bid him farewell. Stepping inside, he quickly found the captain of Unit 6. It wasn't his first time seeing him. He was the very same young man who had given Su Qing such a threatening feeling of danger the previous night. Once again, Su Qing felt his guard going up. The young man saw Su Qing, looked him up and down, and immediately recognized him. He didn't seem very surprised to see him. Intrigued, Su Qing quietly backed up a few steps. "I talked to the director today," said the captain, "and asked him to assign you to me. I honestly had no idea that dirty face of yours would clean up so well. You look completely different compared to last night." His guard going up further, Su Qing said, "Well met. Captain, you can just call me Captain." Smiling enigmatically, he continued, "So, you aren't surprised I wanted you in my unit?" "No, I'm surprised," Su Qing said. "If you're surprised," the captain replied quizzically, "why are you acting so calm?" Su Qing had to admit that what the captain said made sense, so after some thought, he plastered a surprised expression onto his face. A moment passed, then the captain continued, "The reason I asked for you to be assigned to my unit is that we've lost a few constables over the past few days. We're short-staffed, and we have some important assignments coming up." As he spoke, the captain kept his eyes on Su Qing. Upon hearing that constables had died, Su Qing's heart sank a bit. However, he didn't jump in with any questions, and instead kept his eyes on the captain and waited for more details. Seeing Su Qing react this way, the captain smiled broadly. "Excellent, you seem a lot stronger than past new recruits. Su Qing, you're the first person to show up today and you're not familiar with how things work. How about this? I'll take you on patrol with me. Along the way, I'll tell you all about your duties in the Violent Crimes Division." Captain was a swift and decisive person who struck like lightning and moved like the wind. Not bothering to mention who else was in the unit, he took Su Qing out to the street. As they walked slowly through the crowd, the captain would occasionally call out greetings to shop owners. He seemed warm and kind, but Su Qing hadn't forgotten the dangerous look in his eyes from the night before. He certainly had not seemed very warm and kind then. Because of that, Su Qing kept as much distance as he could. From what Su Qing could tell, the captain's cultivation base was somewhere in the 9th or 10th level of qi condensation. In Seven Blood Eyes, disciples of that caliber were far superior to the old version of Su Qing. "You don't need to be so stiff," the captain said. "Around here, you need to practice having two dispositions. If you don't, you won't survive long." After thinking about the words, Su Qing realized they made sense, so he tried hard to make himself seem a bit more relaxed. However, after all the things he'd been through during the past 7 years, it wasn't very easy. "Forget it for now," the captain said, laughing. "You'll figure it out eventually." Stopping to buy a few apples, he thought, "I recruited a real freak, didn't I?" Seeing that the captain didn't offer him an apple, Su Qing bought 2 for himself. "Okay, let me explain what the 7th Peak Violent Crimes Division does. Basically, we have one responsibility, and that's to kill people." Walking along, the captain noticed a homeless person on the side of the road. He tossed 2 spirit coins to the man, who caught them and offered thanks. Su Qing noted that the homeless person wasn't a cultivator. Then, he thought about what the captain had just said and asked, "You kill violent criminals?" The captain took a bite out of an apple, swallowed it, and seemed to relish the sweet flavor. Then he said, "The patrol division protects common citizens from illegal behavior of both disciples and criminal elements, and makes sure they can pay their bills and taxes. In a word, they maintain law and order. But when they run into situations that they can't handle, the Violent Crimes Division steps in. For instance, if they encounter outlaws or murderous cultivators. Because of that, the Violent Crimes Division always goes on dangerous missions with a high casualty rate. Unit 6 has gone through a lot of new recruits lately. Some died on missions, others were assassinated. Going forward, you need to be very careful. There are upsides to being in the Violent Crimes Division. The pay's good, and we're the only division that gets to hand over wanted criminals and keep the bounty." With that, the captain took another bite of apple. Su Qing looked at the apple for a moment, then asked, "After you kill someone, do you get to keep their belongings?" The captain looked back at Su Qing and saw the serious look on his face. He smiled. "Interesting. You're the first new recruit to ever ask that question at this point in the introduction. Well, let me explain. If you single-handedly kill an outlaw or murderer, then you get to keep everything. If it's part of a team effort, then it gets split up. By the way, in this city there are some people who, if you see them, you should simply walk the other way." As he spoke the words, he pointed across the street to a young man wearing a pale violet Taoist robe, walking through the crowds with an arrogant look on his face. When he stepped into one of the shops, the shopkeeper called out a respectful greeting. Everyone on the street who saw the color of his Taoist robe looked at him with expressions of reverence, and most of them bowed their heads. Even the constables from the patrol division did the same thing. It was almost like he was the child of a god strolling through the mortal world, a being that no one dared to look at directly. Su Qing's pupils constricted. "Remember this," the captain continued. "In the Seven Blood Eyes capital city, people who wear dark Taoist robes and people who wear pale Taoist robes like that should never be provoked. The former are senior-ranked Anpik Foundation establishment disciples. The latter are Anpik Conclave disciples. Conclave disciples aren't in Foundation establishment, but they lead charmed lives nonetheless. When it comes to people like you and me, 100 could die and the sect wouldn't care. But if a single Conclave disciple dies, it's a major event." Su Qing looked over at the distant seventh peak. "Jealous," the captain said. "Just stay alive and keep working on your cultivation. Once you reach Foundation establishment, even the Conclave disciples will have to bow their heads to you." He took another bite of apple. "By the way, I should probably remind you that sect rules prohibit gray-robe disciples from fighting and killing each other. But those are just the rules as written. Fighting and killing actually happens all the time. You just need to figure out a good way to dispose of the bodies. Honestly, the best way is to take their merit points and spirit stones, and then, because their balance is at 0, the spell formation will take care of them." Chewing his apple, the captain gestured with his chin and said, "Like him." Su Qing looked over to see a young man in a gray robe, covered in wounds and gasping for breath, his eyes burning with rage and indignation. His lips were busted and his limbs broken, making it impossible for him to speak or even walk. His identity medallion lay on his chest, and even from a distance it was possible to see that his merit point balance was at 0. Even as Su Qing looked at him, a black beam of light shot down from above and incinerated the young man out of existence, leaving behind only a bit of drifting ash. Su Qing's pupils constricted. However, the passers-by seemed to take the event as a matter of course, and most didn't even look over. They just hurried along, cold and detached. That fellow made a practice of robbing and killing fellow disciples. It was to be expected that he'd end up like that eventually. The captain smiled and was about to keep talking when, all of a sudden, his expression turned serious and he looked further down the street. Su Qing followed his gaze and noticed that, further down in an alley, were mutagen fluctuations. He and the captain were on a busy street, but that alley looked shadowy and dark, and most people seemed to be avoiding it. The captain sighed. "I can't believe this is happening in broad daylight. Wait here for a moment, junior brother." With that, the captain finished his apple as he walked over to the alley. Su Qing watched as the captain then disappeared into the alley. About 10 breaths of time later, he emerged, eating another apple but smelling like blood. Su Qing eyed the alley. Some poor idiot who had transplanted mutant beast body parts onto himself ran into a problem and started mutating. I urge you not to do anything like that. It can boost your cultivation base, but will ultimately cause no end of trouble for you. With a broad smile and an innocent expression, he led Su Qing onward down the street. Su Qing nodded and then followed silently. The man he'd killed the night before also had transplanted mutant beast body parts. Before, Su Qing didn't even know it was possible to do that. Seeing the captain enjoying the sweet apples, Su Qing finally took a bite out of one that he'd bought. It really was very sweet. And thus the two of them strolled through the city, enjoying apples. The captain ate quickly, Su Qing ate slowly. Eventually, the captain ran out of apples and looked over at the second apple Su Qing had bought. Su Qing looked back at him and took a bite out of the second apple. The captain rubbed his nose and pulled a tangerine out of his sack. "Let me tell you about our current mission. We have one main goal for now, and that's to capture members of Night Dove." "Night Dove," Su Qing said. "They're a massive criminal enterprise that operates all over South Phoenix. They specialize in kidnapping children and cultivators and selling them to be living treasures. Normally speaking, they carry out their vile business outside of our borders, but nowadays they've expanded operations into Seven Blood Eyes territory. The populace is on edge, and if things keep going as they are, the Anpik big shots are going to see a dip in profit, and they won't be happy about that. What you saw last night was our director killing one of the Night Dove leaders. It was a joint operation with the violent crimes divisions from all 7 districts, the goal being to devastate their base of operations here." Su Qing's eyes glittered coldly as he thought back to the caravan leader he'd killed back in the base camp. Eyes narrowing, he nodded. The captain was a smart person and could guess what the look in Su Qing's eyes meant. However, he didn't ask any questions. Instead, he continued to lead him through the city and explain things. At a certain point, Su Qing noticed a homeless child at the side of the road, and thinking back to what the captain had done earlier, he tossed the boy a spirit coin. The captain blinked a few times, then looked at Su Qing with an enigmatic smile and said, "Oh, you already have informants in the city." Su Qing didn't say anything in response. However, he was surprised to realize the reason behind the captain's action before. At the same time, he almost felt like he'd been pranked. Eventually, as the sun started to set, they reached the harbor. As they walked past an area filled with piles of cargo, a gruff voice rang out. "Say one more thing, and I'll rip your jaw off your face." Su Qing looked over and saw that, squatting next to a huge pile of cargo, was a seventh peak disciple. He was middle-aged and didn't seem out of the ordinary in any way. In fact, he seemed like an honest, good-natured person. However, he was the one who had just spoken. In front of him was an old man in expensive clothing. He looked angry and had apparently been arguing with the seventh peak disciple. "Whose jaw are you going to rip off, huh, Xianxia?" said the captain, finishing a tangerine and then taking a pear out. He took a bite. When the old man saw the captain, his expression flickered and he hurried away. Meanwhile, the seventh peak disciple looked around with a silly smile on his face. After calling out a greeting to the captain, he looked at Su Qing with the same smile. "This is our latest addition to the Violent Crimes Division, Su Qing," the captain said. Then he pointed at the middle-aged disciple and said, "This is Xianxia. He used to be in Violent Crimes Division, but turned out to be a big coward, so he transferred to the Transportation Division. Don't be fooled by his friendly appearance. He's killed so many pirates and rogue cultivators that there's hardly enough room around here to pile them up." He gestured at the piles of cargo by way of comparison. Su Qing's guard went up. What was most intriguing was that he didn't sense any powerful fluctuations on this Xianxia. If what the captain said was true, then there must be something very unusual about. "Come on, those are just rumors," Xianxia said, rubbing his hands together. "I killed a few small-time crooks, that's all. I still feel bad about that down to this day." All the while, the silly smile never left his face. From what Su Qing could tell, there wasn't an ounce of remorse on the man's face. "Junior brother Su Qing, don't listen to the captain's nonsense. You have to watch out for yourself." With that, he stood and offered a small bone to Su Qing. "Here, take this, a gift to mark the day we met." The bone was bright red, shaped like a hook, palm-sized, and glittered with a strange light. Upon examining it closely, one would see that the surface had a complex set of natural markings on it. The markings seemed to absorb spirit power from the surroundings automatically, causing wind to swirl around Zhang San's palm as he held it out. "An immortal bone from a winged fish," the captain said, taking another bite of pear. "Put that thing in your Dharma boat spell formation and it'll provide a big boost to your speed. Not bad at all." Squatting down next to Zhang San, he smiled, nudged him with his shoulder and continued, "What are you being so generous for today, you little punk?" "How else could I welcome junior brother Su Qing?" Zhang San answered innocently. Su Qing didn't accept the gift, but instead looked at the captain for an indication of what to do. He had the feeling that Zhang San wasn't doing this for Su Qing himself, but rather for the captain. Seeing Su Qing's reaction, the captain smiled. "Take it. He's giving it to you in the hopes that you won't come around here arresting people very often." Hearing this, Su Qing turned back to Zhang San, who looked back with his silly smile. Su Qing nodded, took the fish bone and examined it curiously, then put it in his sack. Then, imitating the captain, he squatted down, though he kept a bit of distance between himself and the other two. Seeing this, Zhang San's smile widened. "Anything unusual going on lately, Zhang San?" the captain asked. Having finished eating the pear, he pulled a peach out and took a bite. Su Qing looked intently at Zhang San, waiting to hear his answer. Instead of answering immediately, Zhang San produced a pipe, took a puff, and then tapped it on the ground. Ash tumbled out, forming into the image of a face, along with a line of characters. "There's a new face over by the South Docks," he said. The captain looked thoughtfully at the ashes on the ground, then clasped Zhang San's shoulder and smiled at Su Qing. "You can head home, little junior brother. You're off duty now. Don't be late tomorrow morning." Su Qing could tell that the two men wanted to talk in private, so he nodded, clasped hands to both men, then turned and left. The orange light of the setting sun shone on his gray Taoist robe as he departed. When he was gone, the captain smiled. "What do you think of the new recruit? You really are acting more generously than usual today." "Where did you find him?" "The first thing the brat did was look at my throat. How could I not be generous with someone like that? The captain laughed heartily. What are you laughing for? Xianxia said, rubbing his neck awkwardly. What kind of person do you think makes it a habit of going around studying throats? The kind of person who slits them, the captain said. He finished his peach, produced a second peach, and took a bite. The little punk is good-looking, but he has a very strong, baleful aura. He tried to hide it, but I can still sense it. And then there are his eyes. Zhang San's expression was now somber as he puffed his pipe. Did you notice that? The captain went on. They're the eyes of someone who seeks revenge over the smallest grievance. I bet he has his own set of principles and won't think twice to kill anyone who violates them. A person like him will work out great for you as long as you treat him well. Treat him badly and you'll get bit. He's killed a lot of people. I get a sense of danger just looking at him. If I met him out on the open sea, I'd be very careful not to provoke him. I don't want to die after all. Zhang San looked at the captain. This new junior brother is indeed very interesting. The captain eyed Su Qing as he made his way off into the distance, looking pleased at Zhang San's final assessment. Zhang San sighed helplessly and reminded himself that the captain was a real freak who always had numerous tricks up his sleeve. As the captain and Zhang San chatted, Su Qing reached the far end of the harbor. The sky was starting to get dark and the streets were emptying. Most shops were closed. Eventually, Su Qing reached his berth, but he didn't immediately take out his Dharma boat. First, he looked around carefully. Someone had come hoping to kill him yesterday, so he wanted to check the area thoroughly. He even sprinkled some poison powder onto the water. When he was satisfied it was safe, he put his Dharma boat onto the water and stepped on board. Only after the defensive shield was up did he truly feel safe. With that, he sat down cross-legged. However, instead of starting his cultivation routine, he mentally reviewed the events of the day. He had a hard time getting a read on the captain, but based on their conversation, Su Qing's intuition was telling him the man was sincere. Meanwhile, he got the feeling Zhang San was hiding something, and it seemed like he feared Su Qing. Then Su Qing thought back to the gray-robed disciple who had been robbed of merit points, crippled, and then had to look up in despair as he was wiped out of existence. Everything he had seen and heard only reinforced his realization that this capital city was a brutal place for disciples. Nothing was as simple as it seemed, and you couldn't ever trust what you saw on the surface. If you took either the captain or Zhang San and dropped them into a scavenger base camp, they could toy with the scavengers with ease and probably massacre them in the blink of an eye. In fact, as far as Su Qing was concerned, Seven Blood Eyes as a whole was like a forbidden region. And because of that, he had to focus on getting stronger through cultivation. That was especially true when he thought back to that young man in the pale violet Taoist robe. He had such a noble status that everyone around him bowed in deference. It really reinforced Su Qing's perception of how important social hierarchy was here. He had seen that kind of thing from the time he was young, and he knew how it worked. In his caution, he hadn't asked the captain for details about the person who gave Su Qing his identity medallion to begin with. If that person wanted to show his face, he would. If he didn't, he wouldn't. Su Qing wasn't going to dig for details. I really doubt it has anything to do with Grandmaster Bai. Closing his eyes, he started his cultivation routine. 2 hours later, when it was dark outside, Su Qing opened his eyes. He looked hesitant. His cultivation speed was much slower than the day before, and he had a good idea why. If he likened himself to a vessel, then yesterday, he had been almost completely empty. Because of that, it hadn't taken much effort to absorb lots of spirit power. But now the vessel was much fuller. Therefore, he needed to improve his absorption ability in order to attract spirit power. Looking down, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, then waved his finger at the deck off to the side. Immediately, glittering light arose from gleaming lines, as a spell formation appeared. As the spell formation began to operate, the spirit power on the outside of the boat stirred in his direction. This was why practicing cultivation on a Dharma boat led to quicker advancement. After all, it was a spirit convergence formation. I need to improve the boat's power source. The Jade slip with information about the Dharma boat indicated that one couldn't just focus on upgrading the boat with better materials. You also had to upgrade the power source. The power source was the core of the Dharma boat, like its heart. It determined how much power the boat had, and there was virtually no limit to how much it could be upgraded. It was also the most expensive aspect of upgrading. All 7th peak disciples, Dharma boats started out with a single spirit convergence formation, which could slowly absorb surrounding spirit power and store it for backup use. If a disciple wasn't satisfied, they could feed spirit stones into the formation to make it stronger and improve the level of power. In addition to that, the hearts of certain large mutant beasts could be used as power sources. The greater the power in the heart, the greater the power of the formation. At the same time, the speed and other general properties of the boat would receive a boost. Without making the proper internal adjustments, it didn't matter what the external configuration was, it couldn't be fully utilized. With these thoughts in mind, Su Qing gritted his teeth, took out 10 spirit stones and put them onto the formation. A moment later, the spirit stones disappeared, and Su Qing felt the Dharma boat shudder. Brilliant shafts of light shot out of the spell formation, and the Dharma boat became like a vortex as dense spirit power rushed toward it from all directions. Su Qing immediately began his cultivation, and this time progressed much more quickly. Around the time the sun rose, Su Qing's eyes snapped open, and violet light spilled out of them. See forming scripture, 6th level. He took a deep breath as he sensed the 180-meter spirit sea within him. It was only 30 meters larger than before, but that small increase provided profound benefits. He had a much greater spirit power capacity, and even better, had access to many more transformations than before. He was also stronger. At this rate, it won't take long before my sea-forming scripture is at the same level as my sea and mountain incantation. Su Qing was pleased with the speed of his progress, but sighed at the resources he'd been forced to spend. Over the course of the night, he had completely wiped out his collection of spirit stones. Given that it was morning, Su Qing straightened out his robe, then debarked his Dharma boat and headed to the Violent Crimes Division for his second day of work. His assignment was mandatory, but he got a salary. According to the information in his identity medallion, his remuneration was 3,000 merit points per month. Because of that, he was taking it seriously. Not long after sunrise, he arrived at the Violent Crimes Division and went straight to the Celestial Bureau. There, he saw the captain as well as some of the other Unit 6 constables. There were about 20 people in the unit, including both men and women. Everyone had their own look, but they all had extraordinary cultivation base fluctuations. As they looked at Su Qing, most had cold expressions, and the majority seemed cautious of him. Not being very sociable himself, Su Qing stepped off to the side and waited quietly. The captain casually ate an apple as he said, "Our mission today is to go out and look for members of Night Dove. Don't spend all your time focusing on the bounty list. I know the bounties are enticing, but right now our focus should be on Night Dove. If you uncover any clues, don't beat the grass and startle the snake. Come back here and report the matter. The division will arrange for a comprehensive investigation. Now, get to work." The constables of Unit 6 dispersed. This time, the captain didn't take Su Qing with him. Instead, he gave him a jade slip with a bounty list, then sent him off on his own. Su Qing had no problem with this arrangement. Before long, he was out of the Violent Crimes Division, patrolling through the city while simultaneously examining the bounty list. Since he wasn't sure of the best route to patrol, he did the same as they'd done the day before and headed toward the port district. He kept his guard up and took off his Violent Crimes Division badge. Most of the time, he kept to the shadows and other locations where he wouldn't attract notice. As he looked at the bustling crowds and busy shops, he came to an even deeper understanding of how prosperous this city was. At a certain point, he noticed a vendor selling candied fruit on a stick. Thinking back to when he was young and always wanted to have candied fruit, he stepped over to buy a skewer. After inspecting them to make sure they were safe, he bought one and continued on his way. After studying the bounty list, he realized why the captain had reminded Unit 6 not to focus too much on bounty hunting. The bounties for capturing such criminals started at 10 spirit stones and went up into the hundreds. Several hours later, as noon approached, he was still working on his skewer of candied fruit when he suddenly stopped walking and looked down the crowded street. Threading her way skillfully through the crowd was a slender, good-looking young woman in a coarse garment. As Su Qing watched, she picked the pockets of 2 passers-by. She seemed very confident in her skills and even smiled smugly as she placed the stolen goods in her own sack. Her smile lasted until she spotted Su Qing looking at her from down the street, his face completely expressionless. Face flushing with embarrassment, she was about to walk away when she realized that Su Qing was walking straight toward her. She looked cautious and obviously didn't recognize Su Qing, but could tell that she was in danger and quickly backed up to melt into the crowd. Su Qing, meanwhile, had already recognized her. This woman was the same one who had tried to get her pursuers to shift attention to him on the street the other night. That was Su Qing's first night in the city, and also the first time he killed someone here. Su Qing quickly finished the last piece of candied fruit and then suddenly threw the bamboo skewer, which shot like a bolt of lightning toward the woman. When the woman saw how fast he was, her face fell. She had no time to react and no chance to disappear into the crowd. The bamboo skewer pierced the woman's right foot, and with a thump, she fell to the ground. She screamed, but the passers-by didn't want to get involved and quickly fled. At the same time, Su Qing's cold voice reached the trembling young woman's ears. "Scream again, and I'll rip your jaw off your face." As it turned out, Su Qing had a good memory and was also skilled at imitating others. Su Qing was still irritated about what happened that night. He had wanted to avoid killing anyone on his first day in Seven Blood Eyes, but this woman had dragged him into her issue. If he had been someone else with a weaker cultivation base and lower battle prowess, then he would probably have been killed. That was why he struck like lightning. As soon as the woman heard his words, she snapped her mouth shut and lay there trembling. Of course, she knew full well what advantages women had. Most men would feel pity for a terrified woman, and therefore, she did her best to make herself seem completely beside herself with fear. Meanwhile, Su Qing, still chomping on his last candied fruit, walked toward her, while making sure to keep an eye out in case the woman was working with a partner. Before he even got close, the crowd had vacated the area around the woman. There were a few people in the area who had cultivation bases and seemed inclined to help the pitiable woman. But when they saw Su Qing and sensed his extraordinary energy, they ducked their heads and left. As Su Qing approached, the woman, whose foot was still impaled to the ground, trembled as hard as she could. She was even sweating profusely. However, it was at that moment that something clicked and she realized who Su Qing was. On the very night she tried to set him up, his cold eyes and ruthless manner made it obvious that she'd gotten tangled up with a terrifying person. Ever since then, she'd been in hiding and hadn't stepped foot outside. It was only today that she decided the matter must have blown over. Most likely, the terrifying person she dragged into her affair was some criminal figure from out of town, who wouldn't possibly show his face during the day. That was why she'd finally come out. It had seemed impossibly unlikely that she would actually run into that very person, and even if she did run into him, she was confident that she could simply run away from him. After all, she was an ordinary citizen, and the patrol division kept the peace. According to the rules of the city, she shouldn't be in any danger. But as Su Qing approached and squatted in front of her, she suddenly realized that the patrol division wasn't anywhere to be seen, and she started to wonder if she was about to die. The only thing she could do was tremble harder and make herself seem more terrified, hoping to buy enough time that someone would come to her aid. "Cut the act," Su Qing said, reaching down and pulling the bamboo skewer out of her foot. The pain and the fact that he had seen through her act caused the woman's eyes to grow wide with real terror. Realizing how close he was, she considered one final option, and her right fist twitched. However, she just didn't dare to toss out the poison powder she held there. Around then, the sound of a whistle pierced the air as a team of cultivators from the patrol division appeared down the street and started racing in their direction. Hope finally flickered in the woman's eyes. However, when Su Qing flashed his Violent Crimes Division badge to the patrol division cultivators, they turned and left. Finally, the hope in the woman's eyes was replaced with despair. Trembling, she stammered, "I'm sorry about what happened before. I can make it up to you. I have information about a wanted criminal." She didn't bother trying to haggle with him about how much she owed. Given the years she'd spent operating in the night, she knew that a person this strong could easily kill her. She was in no place to negotiate, and therefore, cooperation was the only option. Not waiting for Su Qing to say anything in response, she quickly continued, "I'm talking about Master Greencloud, who was recently expelled from the Spirit Cloud sect. For the past few days, he's been staying at a place on Plankspring Way. It's the same inn where you and I ran into each other last time." Wanted criminal. Su Qing glanced down at the Jade slip with the bounty list and didn't have to look long before finding Master Greencloud's name. The reward for his capture was 20 spirit stones. "Also," the woman continued, "I heard that the Violent Crimes Division has been investigating Night Dove lately. I know where one of their hideouts is." Knowing how much danger she was in and hoping to save her own life, she went on to explain all the details about the hideout. After hearing everything, Su Qing looked at her, then thought back to the captain's informant. Taking out a spirit coin, he held it out to her. "If you have more information like this, come back here and wait for me to find you." The woman stared in shock and even hesitated for a moment. She knew full well what kind of arrangement she was getting herself into. Gritting her teeth, She nodded and took the spirit coin. Then she got up and hobbled away as quickly as she could. After she disappeared into the crowd, Su Qing stood up. He didn't bother to check into whether or not the woman's information about the night dove hideout was accurate. He would simply report the information and let the division handle the further investigation. By the time he finished his patrol, the sun was sinking toward the horizon. At that point, he headed back to the inn where he'd spent his first night in the city. Despite being daytime, the inn was open, although it seemed mostly empty. Su Qing eyed the place from a distance, thinking back to the gruish old man who ran it. Never the one to take action blindly, he simply watched the inn for a bit, then headed back to the Violent Crimes Division to deliver the information about the hideout. After that, he was off duty. It was possible that the woman from earlier had no intention of being his informant and would simply disappear. To Su Qing, it didn't matter, and that was because the coin he gave her had poison on it, and she would need the antidote within 3 days. Back at the division, he saw some other Unit 6 constables, but they were all cold and detached and didn't say anything to him. There was one middle-aged constable who offered him a smile and invited him to go drinking. In Seven Blood Eyes, where killing was prohibited, yet people fought and robbed each other left and right, a sudden invitation like this seemed suspicious. So Su Qing politely turned down the invitation. Today was a special day, and he didn't want to kill anyone. He wanted to be alone. What was more, he had one more stop, a medicine shop. There were some special medicinal plants he needed to concoct white boluses, and if he succeeded in making the pills, he could sell them. He had almost run out of poisons and black boluses and needed to replenish his stock. And what was more, he had some ideas for more types of poisons that he wanted to experiment with. Consulting his mental map of the city, he went to a medicine shop he'd noticed earlier. It was a big shop and had a lot of customers, all of them wearing gray Taoist robes. Medicinal pills and similar items were things disciples from all the different mountain peaks needed. When Su Qing entered the shop, his delicate, almost pretty face attracted some attention. However, after glancing at him, the disciples looked. Meanwhile, Su Qing looked around at the people inside the shop, then walked over to the counter. The old shopkeeper was at the counter, as well as a customer, a pudgy young man in a gray Taoist robe. His robe was almost too tight for him, making him look like a bulging ball. He had fair skin and freckles, and looked like he was 16 or 17 years old. He was currently yawning as he put the medicinal plants he'd purchased into a big sack hanging from his shoulder. From the haphazard way he put everything into his bag, Su Qing could tell that he didn't know anything about medicinal plants. There were some plants that shouldn't be stored together, but this young man was just throwing everything in randomly. As he neared, Su Qing heard the putty young man talking in a dissatisfied tone. "Shopkeeper, this isn't much of a haul. Why so few plants? You come every day and clear everything out. Come back tomorrow. The big boss has a new shipment coming in." The shopkeeper was obviously familiar with the young man. After handing over all the plants, the shopkeeper noticed Su Qing. "Hello there, junior brother. What medicinal items are you looking for?" "I need 10-year-old mothbone flowers living," Su Qing said calmly. 30 stalks of goldwing leaf, 10 stalks of cleversprite branch prepped for use, a bunch of 7-leaf clovers any vintage, and 100 stalks of gold-bitten weed. Also, rhinofire blossoms with the roots attached, as well as some condensing spirit leaves. I need 10 each with white-colored roots. After some thought, Su Qing mentioned a few types of venom and poisonous plants, then concluded with, "Do you happen to have any rotcloud mud or blacksham thorns?" The shopkeeper stared at Su Qing for a moment. Most customers who came to this shop were disciples buying pills. Occasionally, people would come in to buy medicinal plants, but they were usually disciples from the second peak. Either that, or people like this pudgy young disciple who didn't know much about medicinal plants. He didn't see many people like Su Qing, who were so articulate, yet unfamiliar, and obviously not from the second peak. What was more, the shopkeeper knew that most of the ingredients Su Qing had mentioned were required for white boluses. After a moment, he said, "We have all of that. It'll cost you 380 spirit coins. Actually, we don't have condensing spirit leaves. Our last 100 were just purchased by this fellow here." He pointed at the pudgy young disciple. "We'll have more tomorrow." Su Qing nodded. Although the condensing spirit leaves were important, he could wait for a day. The asking price was reasonable. Assuming his concocting efforts went well, he would be able to make over 100 white boluses, plus a lot of poison powder. Just as he was about to hand over the money, the pudgy young man looked over at him and said, "Condensing spirit leaves. Do you need these things too? What are they good for? I've asked the shopkeeper a bunch of times, but he won't tell me." The shopkeeper sighed. If I spent time answering all of your countless questions, I wouldn't have time to attend to any of the other customers. Su Qing looked at the pudgy young man and thought about himself in the past, thirsting for knowledge. There are two main uses for condensing spirit leaves, he said. First, they can be a catalyzing agent when used with other plants, allowing you to guide the resulting variations in the mixture. Second, they're great for moisturizing the skin. A look of enlightenment suddenly appeared on the pudgy young man's face. Then he pulled out a handful of condensing spirit leaves, about 7 or 8 in total, and handed them to Su Qing. Thank you, brother. Here, take these. With that, the young man shouldered his bag and walked out, looking very pleased. It seemed that, to him, giving away free medicinal plants to people was something of little consequence. Su Qing was taken aback and wanted to decline the offer, but before he could, the pudgy young man was walking away, pulling out his identity medallion to send a voice message to someone. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper chuckled. The fat kid is Huang Yan from the 7th Peak. He's a prodigy when it comes to pursuing love. I'm not sure which girl he's obsessed with, but he's been coming here for 7 or 8 years to buy medicinal plants for her. In fact, he spent so much money he could be my boss. In any case, the kid isn't as simple as he seems. People who stick out from the crowd usually die early, but he's been around for years. Su Qing looked at Huang Yan walking off into the distance. Not making conversation with the shopkeeper, he purchased his medicinal plants and then left. Back at his berth, he did his usual inspection and then got into his Dharma boat. After activating the defenses, he breathed a sigh of relief. He felt a sense of security inside the Dharma boat that was impossible to feel while outside. Taking out his new plants, he arranged them according to their type, then thought of the pill formula for white boluses. Despite never having all the ingredients to make white boluses, he hadn't forgotten the mixture ratios. And now that he had everything ready, he didn't waste any time in attempting to concoct the pill again. Time passed, and soon it was late in the night. As the wind blew, rippling the water, the little boat creaked, bobbing up and down, creating gray froth. Inside the boat, Su Qing was completely focused on his pill concocting. One by one, he took out the medicinal plants he needed, either plucking off the leaves, extracting the sap, or removing stamens before carefully putting them into the stone bowl. As he worked, more and more medicinal liquid built up. After confirming the mix ratio and making some final adjustments, he added the 7-leaf clover. And then, at just around midnight, he carefully added the sap of the condensing spirit leaf into the black liquid. Hissing and popping sounds rang out, and a green smoke rose up that he brushed away. Then the medicinal liquid in the stone bowl turned white and semi-solid. At the same time, it glowed faintly. He had succeeded. After a final inspection, he took the liquid out and rolled it into the shape of a large pill. Putting it down to dry, he looked at it, his eyes glowing with satisfaction. I finally made a white bolus. All of a sudden, he thought back to Grandmaster Bai's lectures in the scavenger base camp. Today was a special day, and because of that, such memories caused his mood to become unusually tranquil. A moment later, he sighed and looked out into the darkness outside the boat. The moon hung in the sky, its reflection visible on the rippling surface of the water. Everything was quiet, except for the faint sea breeze, humid and cold, causing his hair to sway gently. Grandmaster Bai should be back in the Violet Lands by now. I wonder where Crucifix and Graceful Raptor ended up. The Sergeant Thunder's grave have weeds growing on it already. I still haven't found any lifespin flowers. He was used to being alone, and was also used to adapting to new situations. But in the end, he was still a kid. Sitting there quietly, he thought back to the place he'd once lived in the scavenger base camp, and that familiar old man who loved eating snake meat. He'd often listened to him talking about the latest gossip in the camp, while enjoying a smoke and a drink. The memories were vivid. Su Qing looked down. That scholar back in the slums once said that when you start thinking about the past, it means you're growing up. Su Qing took out a jug of alcohol he'd purchased while on patrol earlier. Looking back up at the bright moon, he raised up the jug respectfully, then took a drink. From a distance, it was possible to see a young man alone on a boat, drinking respectfully with the moon. The alcohol in the capital city was stronger than in the base camp. It burned when it went down, becoming like a fire in his belly that spread out to fill his entire body. After taking a drink, he took a moment to breathe before drinking again. I wish Sergeant Thunder's soul a good journey in heaven. I wish Grandmaster Bai health and longevity. And I wish myself a happy birthday. He took another drink. Today was special because it was his birthday. Su Qing seemed like he was 16, but in reality he was only 15. Given how much he'd grown, he was a lot more experienced than someone the same age as him. This year, just like so many years in the past, he spent his birthday alone. The only difference was that this time he had some alcohol. Taking another drink from the jug, he thought about his family. He could still remember them. However, the memories were hazy, no matter how hard he tried to recall the details. It hurt inside. He didn't want the memories to be hazy, but there were some things you just couldn't change. Time passed. "Are you all doing well?" he murmured, his head bowed. The wind blew, brushing against his hair and face. It was cold, and it gradually pulled him out of his memories and caused his eyes to harden. Again, his facial expression went back to its usual cold and detached state. "Keep on living. As long as I stay alive, then I'll have a chance to see Dad and Mom again, and that would be amazing. Therefore, I have to get stronger." He looked up, and the moonlight shone down on him. He seemed like a lone wolf staring off into the distance. Then he settled down cross-legged to start his cultivation routine. Time passed. After his birthday, he settled into a routine. For days, he went on patrol during the day and worked on pill concocting and cultivation in the evenings. Even by using spirit stones to speed up his cultivation of the sea-forming scripture, progress was still a bit slow. It took several days to go from the 6th level into the 7th. He knew that his speed would continue to slow going forward, although compared to other people, he would still be astonishingly fast. Once in the 7th level, Su Qing could tell that his battle prowess was vastly superior to before. In fact, he was completely and utterly confident that if he had to fight the version of himself that had just arrived at 7 blood eyes, he would kill him in 30 breaths of time or less. Although he was still a far cry from being a match for Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior, Su Qing was confident he could at least hold his own for a time in such a fight. "Once I'm a bit stronger, I'm going to go back and kill Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior." He would feel uneasy until the day he accomplished that. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior surely knew how 7 blood eyes operated and wouldn't try to kill him in the sect. But he could lend someone a knife and have them do his dirty work for him. Su Qing knew he had to improve his cultivation base and get rid of that threat once and for all. He had done a lot more research into Dharma boats and had read the Jade slip instructions thoroughly. What was more, he had practiced enough that he had complete control over the operation of the boat. For now, he decided that the first thing he needed to focus on was the hull. He would upgrade his Dharma boat by means of improving its hull and defenses. That would prevent the boat from being damaged, and would thus ensure that he didn't need to worry about making repairs. What was more, 7 Blood Eyes was a place where you always had to worry about being ambushed. The Dharma boat was the most secure and safe location, a place where he needed privacy to rest, concoct pills, and work on cultivation. Because of that, he needed the boat to have adequate defenses. As the days passed, Su Qing concocted quite a few white and black boluses. Furthermore, he created some more poison powders. As he concocted pills, he paid very close attention to everything that happened, thus improving his understanding of plants and vegetation. After every concocting session, he would carefully organize his leftover plants. Thus, the interior of his Dharma boat eventually became packed with all sorts of ingredients. Because of the dense population in the city, he didn't think it was a good idea to experiment with new poison concoctions. However, he did start building up a good collection of ingredients to do so. Next time he got a chance to leave the city, he would find a safe place for some experimentation. He got more and more familiar with working in the Violent Crimes Division. The entire division was still focused on tracking down members of Night Dove, with new information coming in on a daily basis. Su Qing had the feeling it wouldn't be long before the division tightened the net and took action. On one particular day when Su Qing was supposed to be on night duty, he submitted an application to switch shifts with someone. All constables in violent crimes had to go on night patrol at some point, although those shifts were a lot more dangerous. His application was approved, and thus, as the sky grew dark, Su Qing straightened his clothing, put some poison powder packets into his sleeves, strapped his daggers and iron skewer into place, and then walked out of his Dharma boat. Darkness was already driving away the evening light, and a light rain ensured that the sky wasn't even visible. Su Qing slipped into the darkness, blending into the rain and the shadows. As the rain splattered onto him and the cold wind hit him, he took in a deep breath. The rain drove away any heat that remained in the city, but it couldn't get rid of that unique smell the city had. Su Qing sped along, splashing through the puddles formed by the rain. As the splashes rippled out, they looked like flowers. In fact, it seemed like each step he took formed lotuses beneath his feet. The night grew deeper, and the rain fell harder. Su Qing sped by alleyways and closed-up shops. He saw people fighting in the streets but avoided them. Eventually, he reached Plank Spring Way. Staying beneath the eaves of a building across the street, he watched the inn through the rain. It was only a few days ago that he had learned that the wanted criminal Master Greencloud was staying in this place. According to the information in the bounty list, he'd come from a small sect in the Violet Lands called the Spirit Cloud Sect. The man was in the 9th level of chi condensation and was vicious, merciless, and given to lust. After killing some female disciples in his sect, he fled. During the process, he had pillaged numerous villages, raping and killing to his heart's content. Originally, Su Qing hadn't been inclined to go arrest him. He had no beef with the man. In the brutal, chaotic world they lived in, everyone lived in their own way, and Su Qing wasn't inclined to go around sticking his nose in the affairs of others. But Master Greencloud had made a mistake. Su Qing had been expecting his informant to come back 2 days after their initial meeting to ask for the antidote to the poison he'd given her, except she never showed up. The next day, Su Qing had gone looking for her. The city was a windy place, but that couldn't drive away the unique scent of the poison powder he'd used. Therefore, it wasn't hard for him to track down her residence. Inside, he saw signs of a struggle, and then traces of the poison powder going in a different direction. He followed it to this inn. After waiting outside for a time, he saw a person enter the inn, covered in that very same poison powder. It was none other than Master Greencloud from the bounty list. Therefore, Su Qing had requested time off so that he could come here. That woman was his informant, and therefore this was now his matter. As time passed, the rain fell harder. The howl of the wind sounded like weeping as it swept through the capital city of 7 blood eyes. In every street and alley, it met the embrace of the rain, and eventually it landed on Plank Spring Way and Su Qing. It hit the surrounding roof tiles in a staccato patter, while the wind caused Su Qing's robes to flap. However, as he stood beneath the eaves of the building, he didn't seem to even notice the wind. He was a part of the shadows, like a skilled hunter, completely unmoving as he stared coldly across the street. He was patient, his breath rate low as he waited. 2 hours passed. Lights in the houses throughout the city were slowly extinguished, until the city was pitch black and silent but for the sound of the storm. That was when a shadowy figure stuck its head out of the inn. It was a middle-aged cultivator in a long red robe. He was clearly well built, with broad shoulders and an intimidating presence. He was none other than Master Greencloud. His spirit power fluctuations were extraordinary, like those of the 9th level of chi condensation. He was very strong. However, that level of strength would only be impressive in a small sect or organization. This was 7 Blood Eyes territory. Disciples here had unique techniques that gave them an unusually strong foundation. Furthermore, the ruthless atmosphere of this sect made it such that an ordinary disciple of 7 Blood Eyes who was in the 7th level of chi condensation would be able to crush someone from a smaller sect who was in the 9th level. Because of that, Master Greencloud acted with great caution while here. Remaining inside the inn, he looked out to make sure the coast was clear, then took a single step outside. After taking that single step, he blurred into a run. However, after going only 5 steps, his expression flickered as though he'd sensed some extreme threat in the area. He hadn't seen Su Qing, but trusting his senses, he spun back toward the inn. Su Qing frowned. He'd originally planned to let the man run a bit farther before making a move, but seeing what was happening, Su Qing's eyes glittered coldly and he started moving. He was like a bolt of lightning piercing through the rainwater. Something like a thunderclap rang out as, from Su Qing's perspective, the rain slowed to a crawl. Master Greencloud's face fell as he saw Su Qing and realized the terrifying speed he was capable of. Also, he could sense the aura of the Forbidden Sea on him, which created such an intense pressure that his own spirit power became sluggish. Instantly, his heart pounded with a profound sensation of deadly crisis. Eyes turning crimson, he bit down on the tip of his tongue to unleash a secret magic. Tapping into his cultivation base, he shot forward with even greater speed toward the door of the inn. As all of this happened, an old man inside the inn smoked a pipe and watched Su Qing through the haze of smoke. Master Greencloud's eyes were completely bloodshot as he reached a spot so close to the inn that he was only half a step from reaching the interior. Just as his right foot was about to span the gap, a dark blur bursting with the spirit power of the Forbidden Sea pierced through Master Greencloud's defenses and stabbed into his right calf. It moved with such speed and power that Master Greencloud instinctively let loose a blood-curdling scream. His right foot was now incapable of stepping into the inn. What was more, he was knocked to the side, where he staggered backward as a second dark blur raced toward him. It was a dagger that flew with shocking speed to stab into Master Greencloud's left arm. Thump! Terrifying spirit power exploded into him, shattering his meridians and blood vessels as he was knocked down and pinned face first to the ground. He was now within arm's reach of the inn's front door. Screaming, blue veins bulging out on his forehead, he struggled to pull the dagger out of his arm and crawl into the inn. But he was too slow. Su Qing arrived and stamped his foot down onto the man's back. The immense force in his foot caused cracking sounds to ring out as Master Greencloud's spine shattered. More pain coursed through him violently, causing his screams to turn even more blood-curdling. Inside the inn, the old man took his pipe out of his mouth. At the same time, a very dangerous aura erupted from him as he looked out coldly at Su Qing. "Are you going to break my house rules?" His eyes had turned yellow, and writhing tentacles wriggled out from their depths. At the same time, his forehead split open, as if something shocking and ghastly existed inside of him. A strange sound could be heard inside the inn as a massive anaconda appeared, its body as thick as 3 people put together. Lowering down from the rafters of the inn, it looked at Su Qing, radiating an icy and bloodthirsty air. In addition to that, a horde of centipedes burrowed out from the ground, all of them pitch black and obviously extremely venomous, and ready to attack at any moment. Finally, piercing auras emerged from the rooms in the inn, forming ropes that locked onto Su Qing and encircled him. The ropes almost seemed alive, as if, at any moment, it could bind Su Qing before he could react. They were permeated with a boundless aura of death, as if they had killed far too many people to even count. Everything present was focused on Su Qing. He stood there at the door, his foot planted firmly on the back of the screaming Master Greencloud. Then he looked up at the old man. Their eyes met. Su Qing didn't seem to notice the mutant beasts, or the powerful auras locked onto him, or the ropes. Instead, he just looked at the old man. As he did, a figure appeared behind him, a hobgoblin like a pitch-black evil ghost, just waiting to attack. As the sea and mountain incantation thrummed to life within him, every bit of his flesh and blood seemed to ready for explosive action. It was the same with the sea-forming scripture. All of the rainwater around him stopped in midair, then began to slowly rotate around him in response to the call of his internal spirit. It seemed he was ready to unleash lethal arts at any moment. His poisons were ready, and his shadow, though silent and undetectable, had already slid inside the inn and was just in front of the gruish old man's feet. Especially noteworthy was how the rainwater that flowed above Su Qing seemed to reveal the outline of an illusory saber. It was barely visible, but it contained impressive might. And though it seemed restrained at the moment, it was capable of sending that heavenly saber slashing down into the earth. Su Qing narrowed his eyes. He didn't seem shaken by the tentacles in the old man's eyes, or the way his forehead was about to open up. He could tell the innkeeper was strong, but at the same time couldn't simply back down. Expression calm, he said, "I haven't stepped inside, therefore I haven't broken your house rules." The old man's eyes glittered with an unusual light as he looked at Su Qing for a long moment, then smiled. "I suppose you're right." All of the auras that had been locked onto Su Qing vanished. The anaconda slid back up into the roof beams, and the centipedes rustled back into the ground. The ropes also vanished. A moment later there was nothing there. Only the old man remained, though the tentacles and the split in his forehead were gone, and he looked just like he had before. He was now an old man smoking a pipe. "Want to sell the corpse?" Su Qing shook his head. Grabbing the trembling Master Greencloud by the hair, he looked down and said, "Where's the woman you kidnapped 2 days ago?" Master Greencloud's hair was disheveled. He was covered in blood and looked to be in very bad shape. But even as he trembled, it seemed he was going to make it clear he wouldn't talk, by spitting in Su Qing's face. Before he could, Su Qing released his hair, allowing his head to drop back down to the ground. Then he patted his head gently. A moment later, a scream rang out as Su Qing grabbed Master Greencloud's right arm and shattered the bones within. Then he did the same with his other arm. Master Greencloud shook from the pain and screamed uncontrollably. Su Qing's expression remained placid. Looking Master Greencloud up and down, he then clenched his hand into a fist and punched the man's Danchin region, crushing his cultivation base. Now that the man wasn't a threat, Su Qing stepped over to retrieve his dagger and iron skewer. Finally, he grabbed Master Greencloud's foot and dragged him away. The streak of blood left behind was quickly diluted by the rain. But as Master Greencloud felt his wounded flesh scraping against the ground, he screamed even more shrilly. And thus, Su Qing walked away, leaving behind a quickly vanishing trail of blood behind him. Seeing this, the old man's pupils constricted, and he murmured, "This kid is certainly ruthless enough." The screaming Master Greencloud didn't go unnoticed by people creeping through the darkness of night. When they saw him, they were deeply shaken and, of course, were struck even more profoundly by the expressionless young man dragging him along. There were some disciples on patrol who, upon hearing the screaming, rushed to investigate. But when they recognized Master Greencloud, they looked in shock to identify who it was that was dragging him through the streets. Master Greencloud might only be from a small sect, but he was still in the 9th level of Qi condensation. Yet Su Qing had not only captured him alive, but had inflicted serious torment in the process. Nobody would dare to mess with a person who could do that. This fight was going to earn Su Qing some prestige in the city. Master Greencloud was strong-willed and held out for almost 2 hours before giving in. Just before passing out, he gave Su Qing the information he sought, the location of the informant that he'd kidnapped. As it turned out, Master Greencloud had groomed that woman as a personal spy. What was more, he had no idea she'd sold him out to Su Qing. However, he had a custom of only keeping his spies around for a limited time before getting rid of them. Sadly for that woman, her turn had come. After confirming the address, Su Qing went there and looked around for traps. Once inside, he found himself in a secret subterranean dungeon that stank of evil. There he found his informant, barely breathing. She didn't have the spirit coin Su Qing had given her, and though she still bore the faint scent of his poison powder, this location was sealed to the outside, which was why he'd been unable to find her. She wasn't dead, but on her left and right were rotting corpses of both men and women. They had died horribly and in torment. What was more, there was a spell formation on the ground. Apparently their deaths were part of some sort of ritual. Seemingly sensing Su Qing's presence, his informant opened her eyes, and when she saw the unconscious Master Greencloud, a wave of strength rose up within her. Lunging forward like a wild animal, she tore a chunk of flesh out of the man's shoulder. Waking up, he screamed, but she just kept biting and ripping out chunks of flesh. Eventually, when Master Greencloud was a mass of mangled flesh, she stopped, panting. Then she looked up at Su Qing, who stood there expressionless off to the side. He looked tall and handsome in his gray robe, but there was also something cold and grim about him that she couldn't quite pin down, and the aura he exuded left her slightly breathless. The madness on her face faded, and as she calmed down, she became docile and meek. She even started shaking. Then she seemed to recall something and got to her feet and started looking around. Eventually, she found a jade slip. Getting onto her knees in front of Su Qing in an almost worshipful posture, she offered him the jade slip with both hands. He took it and examined the contents. It described a spell formation that, upon being activated, would bestow unfathomable power. In order to activate the formation, it needed to be fed the emotions of living beings, things like happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. Su Qing looked around at the miserable conditions within the dungeon, then turned to drag Master Greencloud's corpse away. Just before leaving, he said, "Going forward, I hope you work hard as my informant." He also tossed her a spirit coin and an antidote pill. She took them and watched Su Qing leave, and deep in her soul she agreed to his demands. Dawn was just around the corner as Su Qing took out a black umbrella and started dragging Master Greencloud's corpse through the streets. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to mirror his mood. Eventually, he dropped the corpse off at the Violent Crimes Division to the shock of his colleagues. By that time, the sun was visible in the sky, and he could also see the face of the god above. Determination appeared in his eyes. In this brutal, chaotic world, you have to get strong. That's the only way, to avoid becoming meat on a chopping block. Thunder crashed. Boom echoed out through heaven and earth as the clouds roiled. It sounded like there were invading gods launching attacks from above. Sometimes the thunder came as muffled booms. In other cases, it sounded like a string of explosions that dragged the citizens of the city out of their deepest dreams. Lightning pierced through the sky, ripping apart the darkness of night. It was almost like the sun, obscured by the dark clouds, had a fleeting chance to illuminate the human world below. At dawn, the rain came down harder. The wind grew in intensity, like a howling giant whose cries reached the most distant corners of the city. It almost vied with the thunder. A figure walked along the street holding a black umbrella, barely visible thanks to the sheets of rain. Rainwater smacked loudly into the umbrella, and seemingly in defiance of the obstacle, ran in rivulets down the sides. Only by struggling to fall to the ground below could the drops of water reunite with their companions on the street. That reunion caused ripples of water to spread out, cleaning the streets of the blood that had been shed during the night. However, it couldn't wipe away the brutality of the crimes that had been committed. Everyone has evil in their heart. It's just that the chaotic world we live in makes it easier for people to release it. That was something Sergeant Thunder had said once during dinner. Su Qing had to admit it made sense. The rain grew fiercer, the thunder boomed, and as the storm raged, Su Qing's thoughts grew calm. Without realizing where he was going, he ended up back at Harbor 79, where the water seemed to be boiling. Like usual, Su Qing inspected the area, then took out his Dharma boat. Once inside, he activated the defenses, and as the boat rocked up and down, he sat down cross-legged under the canopy. The boat's defenses blocked the rain, and Su Qing had long since grown accustomed to the motion of the boat on the water. In contrast to the rocking boat and the rain and wind outside, Su Qing felt completely calm as he started concocting some pills. In recent days, Su Qing had consistently purchased medicinal plants to concoct white boluses, black boluses, and poison powders. Similar to his laboratory back in the Forbidden Region, he had created a latticework of cabinets within which were packed with all sorts of vital yang and unhealthy yin medicinal plants. I still need to find a good place to experiment with concocting poisons. After examining the cabinets, Su Qing made a grasping gesture, causing several plants to fly toward him. As the storm raged, he continued his concocting work. Time passed. It rained all day, heavier and heavier, until it was a true raging storm. Waves surged into the port, causing countless boats and ships to rock violently. Thankfully, the Dharma boats were generally safe once their defenses were activated. From a distance, they looked like a host of fallen leaves bobbing on the surface of the water. Because of the storm, there were no visiting trading ships entering the port, nor did anyone leave. Most of the sect departments closed for business, with many of the disciples staying in their residences. The Seven Blood Eyes port largely shut down during the shocking storm. However, the slaughter on the streets continued. As night fell on the second day, and the wind and rain seemed to get even worse, Su Qing sat in his Dharma boat. His eyes suddenly opened as a sense of profound danger rose up within him. That danger wasn't because of the nasty weather, but rather came from the shore just next to his Dharma boat. Despite the rain and wind, he was able to detect the odor of poison powder. It came from some powders he had deposited in the area to act as an early warning system. If anyone got close to his Dharma boat, they would have to step through that powder. Then, if they stepped onto his boat without his permission, other poison gases on his boat would mix with the powder to create something fatally poisonous. Furthermore, his psychic power, which had enabled him to take first place in the entry assessment, had advanced by leaps and bounds thanks to his cultivation of the sea-forming scripture. His sensory abilities were far beyond the level of his peers. Thanks to these two lines of defense, he knew that someone had approached his Dharma boat and was now standing outside. Eyes glittering coldly, he didn't wait inside the boat. Instead, he stepped out onto the open deck and looked through the defenses to the outside world. The dense rain and wind was interspersed by the flash of lightning, which illuminated someone standing on the shore wearing a woven rush raincoat and carrying a jug of alcohol. He was looking at Su Qing. Su Qing looked back. A moment passed, and then the man lifted up his wide conical hat to reveal the smiling face of a middle-aged man. "Junior brother Su, you don't need to be so overly cautious. It's me. I went out to buy some alcohol and was passing by, so I figured I'd ask if you'd like to have a few drinks together. How could it not be a wonderful thing to drink together in wretched weather like this?" This man was a fellow constable from the Violent Crimes Division and was actually in the same unit as Su Qing. He was the same person who had invited him out drinking previously. Su Qing said nothing. He just stared coldly at the man. This caused the man to chuckle helplessly. "Well, never mind. In this damnable sect, it's hard to trust anybody. All I can say is that I don't have any ill intentions. I just want to make friends, junior brother Su. Lots of members of our unit have had drinks with me, but if you're not interested, I'll take my leave." Shaking his head, he turned to go. But that was when Su Qing said, "All right, step aboard." The man stopped walking and looked back curiously at Su Qing. He looked at his boat, and a deep glimmer of light passed through his eyes. Then he shook his head. "Forget about it. I'm not interested in forcing the issue." Then he started walking a bit faster. However, he'd only taken 5 or 6 steps when a high-pitched whistling sound erupted out as a dagger shot toward him with spectacular speed. He immediately jumped out of the way, his face falling as he looked at Su Qing leaping out of his Dharma boat. his iron skewer in hand. "Junior brother Su, what are you doing?" His pupils constricted as he realized Su Qing was rushing right toward him. Quickly performing an incantation gesture, he caused the raindrops in the area to turn into arrows that shot toward Su Qing. However, before they got close, Su Qing waved his hand, and the raindrop arrows shivered, then shifted directions and shot toward the middle-aged constable. The constable was shocked by this, and as a sense of profound crisis rose up in him, he bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. It instantly expanded into a blood mist that blocked the incoming rainwater arrows. Meanwhile, he started moving backward as if to flee. But he wasn't quick enough. He had misjudged Su Qing's cultivation base. In the blink of an eye, Su Qing shot toward him, his iron skewer shining like a lightning bolt as it closed in on the man's head. It radiated a coldness that could pierce bones. The constable's eyes turned bloodshot, and he howled as he unleashed the full extent of his cultivation base. A glittering defensive shield sprang up, while a vicious-looking mouth appeared on his chest, ripping through his garments and unleashing a piercing shriek in Su Qing's direction. The man's defenses shattered, but the sound waves erupting from the mouth on his chest managed to slow down the iron skewer. Taking advantage of that extra time, the man threw the jug of alcohol at Su Qing, turned and fled at top speed. Halfway to Su Qing, the jug shattered, revealing that it didn't contain alcohol but rather a viscous poison liquid. As it splattered, it began to corrode everything it touched. Even the defenses of the Dharma boat began to melt. Su Qing's eyes glittered coldly. He had suspected from the beginning that something fishy was going on but couldn't be sure. But given the weather and the fact that this constable had shown up under such strange circumstances, Su Qing decided to act first. Killing intent glittered in his eyes as he looked at the fleeing man. He didn't give chase. He just reached out and made a vicious, grasping gesture. Inside of him, the sea-forming scripture roared to life. In response, the surrounding rain shivered, then flew through the air madly and converged in the area surrounding the middle-aged constable. There, they transformed into a huge hand that clasped around him. His eyes went wide with astonishment, and he struggled to free himself but failed. Rumble! The man was suspended in midair, his face ashen as death, his eyes filling with terror. He was just opening his mouth to say something when Su Qing arrived and slashed his throat open with his dagger. The force of the blow sent the man's head flying off his shoulders. As blood sprayed everywhere, the huge mouth in the constable's chest bulged out and tried to bite Su Qing's hand. Su Qing's sea and mountain incantation surged, and the spectral hobgoblin appeared, howling noiselessly. At the same time, the hand of rainwater smashed down toward the ground. A boom rang out as the man's headless corpse was smashed into a paste, and the mouth was crushed. Afterward, Su Qing stood in place, breathing hard. The battle had ended quickly, but the truth was that this man's cultivation base was extraordinary and his battle prowess shocking. In fact, it was about the same as Su Qing's before he entered the city. Not even Master Greencloud would have been a match for this man. After all, people who cultivated the sea-forming scripture had battle prowess that surpassed small organizations by a wide margin. Su Qing looked around to see if his dead foe had any companions in the area, but because of the wind and rain, the port was pitch black and was only illuminated by the occasional bolt of lightning. Su Qing inspected the area, then picked up the dead cultivator's blood-soaked sack. After sprinkling corpse-ravaging powder on the corpse, it dissolved into a bloody sludge that mingled with the rainwater. After that, he went back to his Dharma boat. Inside, he opened the sack, then frowned when he realized it only contained a few miscellaneous items. There were no spirit stones or cultivation resources. There most certainly wasn't a Dharma boat. The only thing of note was a blood-colored jade slip and the man's identity medallion. Now that he was dead, the medallion had gone dark, making it impossible to see his merit point balance or to transfer the balance away. The person had to be alive to do that. He must have his belongings hidden somewhere, Su Qing thought. Unfortunately, due to his custom of striking to kill, it wasn't going to be possible to get the man's merit points. Maybe next time I should try to maim first and kill after. After thinking about it, he still felt it would be too risky to do that. Next, he examined the blood-colored jade slip, which caused his eyes to glitter. It's a hit list. It looked similar to the bounty list from the sect, except this list was obviously distributed by an individual. It listed a whole series of disciples from 7 blood eyes, and next to each name was a monetary value. Shockingly, one of the names on the list was Su Qing. It also listed his scavenger nickname, as well as a bounty of 50 spirit stones. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. Su Qing's eyes shone with cold light. The patriarch was the only person who knew his information and could put up a bounty of 50 spirit stones for him. The man had obviously tracked him down and knew he was now in 7 Blood Eyes. It made sense. Although Antlerville was a city owned by 7 Blood Eyes, the Golden Vajra Warrior sect obviously had connections there, so finding out where Su Qing went wouldn't have been very hard. The fact that he figured it out so quickly seems to indicate that he has connections in the sect. But it's against sect rules for outside Foundation establishment cultivators to kill our disciples, so he had to put out a bounty on me. After studying the blood-colored Jade slip a bit more to figure out how to use it, he chose to just continue with the mission to kill Su Qing. I need to speed up my cultivation so that I can finally get rid of Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. 4 days passed in which the rain did not let up. On the 3rd day, it became a massive tempest that kicked up huge waves in the entire port. However, the capital city's spell formation kept things in control. Despite the shocking winds, the port held strong. On the 5th day, the unrelenting winds finally started to die down. At dawn, Su Qing looked up to see a leaden, overcast sky weighing down over the city. At that point, he organized his medicinal pills and stepped out of his Dharma boat. On the shore, he felt the wind and rain and inhaled the scent of the ocean. Within it, there was still a faint hint of blood. During the 4 days in which the storm raged, the Violent Crimes Division didn't shut down. For the most part, their work involved searching for clues about Night Dove. However, thanks to the storm, they now had an additional task: hunting for murderers. When storms hit 7 Blood Eyes, most sect departments ceased operation. And because most cultivators stayed indoors, the robberies and murders that happened in the shadows became even more widespread. During those 4 days, the Violent Crimes Division received reports of more than 80 disciples being killed in the Port District, and 7 victims were actually members of the Violent Crimes Division. As for how many people were killed in the other 6 districts, that information wasn't known publicly either, but it surely wasn't a small number. It was hard to run an investigation in the rain. Besides, 7 Blood Eyes was used to this kind of thing happening and didn't pay much attention to it. The Violent Crimes Division only ran cursory investigations, then dropped the cases. There was even a member of Unit 6 who died, yet no one batted an eyelid. Su Qing managed to ask the captain about the old innkeeper from Plank Spring Way. He was told that the man wasn't human. What was more, he had connections to the First Peak, which gave him the right to reside permanently in the city. Normally speaking, the innkeeper kept his head down, though it was known he would occasionally give shelter to villains in order to give face to the First Peak. The Violent Crimes Division usually looked the other way when he was involved, as long as nothing outrageous happened. This was the first time Su Qing came to realize that humans weren't the only intelligent species in the world. There were actually many others. However, to date he had only ever laid eyes on one non-human, the innkeeper. For now, he didn't think too much about it. After attending morning roll call at the Violent Crimes Division, Su Qing opened his umbrella and started walking down the street. He was planning to head to the medicine shop and try to sell the white boluses he'd concocted recently. He also wanted to buy more medicinal plants. However, because of the large amount of white boluses he was carrying, his guard was fully up. Perhaps because the rain had started to die down, the streets were a lot more crowded than usual. Because of that, it took a bit longer to safely make his way to the shop he frequented. There weren't many people in the shop. However, there was one familiar face, Zhou Qingpeng, who had been in his group when he officially joined the sect. Zhou Qingpeng glanced his way and hesitated briefly, but didn't seem to recognize him. It was little surprise, considering that on the day of the assessment, Su Qing had been dressed like a filth-covered scavenger. Su Qing didn't say anything to Zhou Qingpeng. Off to the side, the old shopkeeper smiled. He was familiar with Su Qing by now, and knew that despite not being a Second Peak disciple, he was knowledgeable regarding medicinal. "You came just in time," the old shopkeeper said. "I have something special to show you today." With that, he pulled out a mysterious-looking bag, which he opened to reveal the corpses of what appeared to be 5 bugs, blue in color and completely dried up. They were vicious-looking, with long mandibles, numerous spikes and natural striations on their backs that resembled ghost faces. Each ghost face was different. One was crying, one was laughing, one was angry, and so on. Especially noteworthy were their tails, which had mouths on the ends, filled with countless razor-sharp teeth. They were dead and withered, yet they looked just as astonishingly vicious as they had in life. "Ghost-longing horseshoe crabs," Su Qing murmured in surprise. Hurrying closer, he looked closely at the ghost-longing horseshoe crabs, which he remembered Grandmaster by talking about in a lecture. They came from the deep seafloor and were rarely seen on land. In the broadest sense, they were considered poisonous bugs. Their blood was blue and highly poisonous. However, when combined in the right ratio with other ingredients, it became an incredibly wondrous medicine. Off to the side, Zhou Qingpeng, who was browsing through the medicinal pills, glanced over. "So, you recognize them," the shopkeeper said with a smile. Yet again, his estimation of Su Qing improved. Even many disciples from the second peak wouldn't be able to identify a rare poison bug like this. And more than ever, the shopkeeper was curious how this handsome young man had learned so much about the Tao of medicine. "How much are you selling them for?" Su Qing asked, inwardly excited. "I wouldn't dare sell them," the shopkeeper replied, clearing his throat. Putting the ghost-longing horseshoe crabs away, he noted the longing with which Su Qing gazed at the bag. Grinning, the old man continued, "My boss tasked me with finding those things, and it took a lot of sweat and blood. They were delivered earlier today, and the boss will be by later to get them, if I dared to sell them. Well, anyway, I just wanted to show them to you. After all, they're extremely rare." Su Qing felt a bit disappointed as he looked away from the sack with the ghost-longing horseshoe crabs in them. However, he didn't immediately take out his white boluses. He waited until Zhou Qingpeng had paid for his purchases and left. Only then did Su Qing take out his sack and put it on the counter. "I'm not here to buy plants," Su Qing said. "I want to sell pills." The shopkeeper's eyes turned serious as he opened the bag and looked at the content. Then his expression turned into one of surprise. So many white boluses. He didn't immediately inspect them. Instead, he washed his hands and then put on a pair of gloves. After making sure Su Qing noticed that the gloves were spotless, he started taking the pills out of the bag. After placing them all out on the counter, the old man looked even more astounded than before. There were over 500 of them, each one smooth and round, and the medicinal aroma they exuded filled the entire shop. Many customers noticed the scent, causing Su Qing to frown and instinctively let his hand slip down next to his sack, where his iron skewer lay. After thoroughly inspecting the pills, the shopkeeper felt profoundly taken aback. Looking closely at the young man in front of him, he realized that he didn't just have a very outstanding understanding of plants and vegetation, he was also exceedingly skilled at concocting pills. These pills were of the highest quality. What was more, the old man could tell that each pill was the result of single-session concocting successes. They weren't a refined version of a previously deficient batch. Every single pill was pure white and naturally lustrous, indicating the presence of natural medicinal oils. Skill like this was a rarity even among second peak disciples. After taking inventory, the shopkeeper muttered for a moment, then said, "How about 10 spirit stones?" Su Qing was familiar with prices in the city and knew that a white bolus usually sold for 30 spirit coins, and 1 spirit stone was equal to 1,000 spirit coins. After thinking about it, he agreed. The shopkeeper quickly took out the spirit stones and gave them to Su Qing, then started organizing the medicinal pills to put into storage. Su Qing looked around one more time at the customers in the shop, then turned to leave. As he did, a young woman appeared at the entrance of the shop. She exuded a strong medicinal aroma. She looked to be only 17 or 18, carried a white umbrella, and was wearing a pale orange Taoist robe. In Seven Blood Eyes, the off-mountain disciples from the various mountain peaks wore gray Taoist robes. Only conclave disciples wore colored garments. For example, conclave disciples from the seventh peak wore pale violet. In other words, Taoist robes like this indicated a very high level of rank. Su Qing noted the garment and stepped aside to let her pass, taking the opportunity to examine her a bit more closely. Beneath the white umbrella, she had long raven-black hair that cascaded down her shoulders, and bangs that fell diagonally across her face, just above her eyes. She had long eyelashes and eyes that glistened. On her, the pale orange Taoist robe almost looked like a beautiful gown. With her slender waist and spectacular beauty, she almost didn't seem to belong in the human world. That was especially true when the wind blew, causing her hair to drift aside, revealing skin as fair and smooth as jade. The young woman noticed Su Qing, and instead of acting arrogantly as one might expect of a conclave disciple, she smiled and indicated that he could walk out before she entered. Nodding, he looked away from her and departed. After he was gone, the young woman entered the shop, and her perfume filled the air. The shopkeeper immediately ran over, his expression very deferential as he said, "Boss, you're here. You didn't need to come in person, ma'am. I could have sent them to you." "You don't have to be so formal, Uncle Peng," she said with a smile. "I got tired of concocting pills on the mountain peak. I needed to get out and clear my head." Of course," the shopkeeper said, acting as deferential as before. "Do what you have to do." Together they walked to the counter, whereupon the shopkeeper took out the sack with the ghost-longing horseshoe crabs, which he handed to her. The young woman shook her head helplessly at the shopkeeper's insistence on being respectful. Taking the sack, she was about to leave when she noticed the white boluses on the counter, which the shopkeeper hadn't finished organizing. She murmured. Picking up one of the white boluses, she gently squeezed it, then held it closer to examine it. Her eyes flickered with surprise. Seeing her do this, the shopkeeper carefully asked, "Boss, is something wrong with that pill?" "There's no problem at all," she said. Putting the pill close to her nose, she inhaled. "The quality is spectacular. You don't see pills like this very often." Hearing this, the shopkeeper looked even more astonished than before. "Boss, you're a conclave disciple from the second peak. Your Tao of alchemy makes you like someone chosen by heaven. Ma'am, are you really saying that these pills have a rare level of purity? Even high-quality white boluses are still just white boluses." The young woman laughed. "You're right, Uncle Peng. White boluses are indeed nothing but white boluses. Although it's great to have a high-quality version, you can get the same effect by just consuming a few more low-quality pills. No, what interests me is that whoever concocted this pill is obviously very skilled." She seemed very intrigued as she continued to study the pill. Then she had the shopkeeper take out the entire lot of pills for her to study one at a time. As she did, her expression of astonishment increased. "Each one is the same, and there are so many. Based on the temperature of the pills, they were concocted in batches, with the most recent batch finished yesterday. This person's ability to craft medicinal liquids has reached a superb level. Every batch is exactly the same." Eventually, she had the shopkeeper pack all of the white boluses up, so she could take them away to study further. Before leaving, something occurred to her and she stopped and said, "Uncle Peng, where did you get these white boluses from?" "Some disciple from one of the other peaks. He left just now. You walked right past him." As he spoke the words, he looked outside the shop, but Su Qing was nowhere to be seen. The young woman thought back to the handsome young man she passed when entering the shop. She nodded. "Uncle Peng, if he comes back to sell more pills, please buy them all and don't put them up for sale. I want them for myself." Hearing this, the shopkeeper was more surprised than ever. "Of course," he said, his curiosity about Su Qing continuing to grow. After leaving the medicine shop, Su Qing headed back toward Harbor 79. In the Violent Crimes Division, attendance at morning roll call was mandatory. After that, you would leave to go on patrol. However, unless there was a big mission, there was usually a lot of free time. And thus, Su Qing would often go back to his berth to work on his cultivation. As usual, he walked along the side of the road where he could stick to the shadows. Because of the big storm, there were many traders and sect disciples who hadn't been able to bring their ships and boats back into the port, and were stuck out on the open sea. But the storm was over, and though it was still raining, there was a lot more traffic on the water. As Su Qing walked along, he thought about medicinal pills and cultivation. The base cost of concocting a white bolus is about 3 spirit coins. If I keep this up, I should be able to make significant profit. He patted his sack with the spirit stones he had earned from selling his white boluses. Cultivation is ridiculously expensive. If I want to keep progressing as quickly as I have so far, I need to use at least 1 spirit stone per day. I also have to worry about the fee for my berth. What's more, it's going to be very expensive to upgrade my Dharma boat. He sighed inwardly and wished he hadn't killed that man so decisively the other night. He really lost a big opportunity by not taking his merit points. Then he started considering tracking down some wanted criminals, or maybe even taking a trip into a forbidden region. Otherwise, he would never save up the funds needed to upgrade his Dharma boat. Everything in this capital city was expensive, and most expensive of all were the cultivation resources. Most of the common citizens could afford the cost of living, but didn't qualify to buy cultivation resources. And even if they did, they definitely wouldn't throw their money away blithely. As for 7 Blood Eyes disciples, the daily living fee of 30 spirit coins wasn't much to worry about. What really fueled all the infighting and slaughter were cultivation resources. Anyone who wanted to progress had to either accept missions and leave the sect, or stay within it and resort to murder and theft. There were no other options. The only ones who had it slightly better off were the Anpik Conclave disciples, though they didn't get a share of the sect's profits. Over the past few days, Su Qing had learned a lot more about 7 Blood Eyes and had a much better understanding of the Conclave disciples. They were people who had acquired an identity medallion of a certain color associated with a given mountain peak. For instance, the seventh peak had violet identity medallions. Anyone with an identity medallion like that could live on peak. They would also get pale-colored garments of the same color. Su Qing had seen disciples on the street like that, for instance the young man with the pale violet Taoist robe and the young woman with the pale orange Taoist robe. They were usually children of senior members of the various mountain peaks, and when they went shopping in the city, they usually got a 50% discount compared to off-peak disciples. Perhaps because of that, the sect forbade them from reselling items for profit, and any who violated that rule would be expelled. There was no fairness to the differences between conclave disciples and off-peak disciples. However, that was just how destiny worked. People on the mountain peaks who had dark-colored Taoist robes were foundation establishment cultivators or higher. They surpassed the conclave disciples and had the right to share in the sect's profits. I need to think of a way to make money. As he pondered these matters, the noise of a commotion interrupted his thoughts. Looking up, he saw a large group of disciples gathered on the shore nearby, apparently waiting for something. Many seventh peak disciples were coming out of their dharma boats to see what was happening, and as Su Qing stood there, he heard the sounds of scrambling from behind him as over 100 seventh peak disciples rushed over to join the crowd. Upon finding a place to stand, they looked out at the main entrance of the port with expressions of excitement and anticipation. Curious about what was happening, he looked in the same direction and before long caught sight of an enormous ship. At the very least, it was about 500 meters long, maybe even close to 550. It was the color of gold and looked very fancy as it glittered in the light of the setting sun. The prow of the ship was the huge statue of a spider with a human face. The human face had only one eye, which was made of a scintillating gemstone. From a distance, the ship looked like some gigantic beast slowly piercing through the water. Looming over the deck was a beautiful superstructure crafted from exquisite materials, and amongst the various parts of the superstructure were a host of guards. The ship made a loud thrumming noise as it got closer and closer to the bay. "It's Third Highness. Third Highness is back." There were quite a few exclamations within the crowd. "Third Highness." Su Qing watched curiously as the incomparably beautiful ship sailed into the bay. As it neared, it brought with it the pungent aroma of the open sea. It also exuded an intense pressure that left the mind shaken. Upon sensing that pressure, Su Qing's pupils constricted. It filled him with a sense of profound crisis, similar to what he had sensed from the various terrifying entities he'd encountered in the jungle depths of the Forbidden Region. Even more astonishing, as the ship neared, Su Qing realized that, in addition to the extravagant superstructure and all the guards stationed there, the ship was also covered with countless glittering spikes. Any given spike was about 3 meters long and covered with complex magical symbols that exuded a shockingly destructive power. This was the most terrifying ship Su Qing had seen to date. In fact, there was no way he could fight against this ship. Just looking at it gave him a new understanding of the Seventh Peak's dharma boats. As he stood there, shaken, he suddenly realized that the crowd was cheering respectfully, which caused him to look up at the main deck of the ship, where a group of people had emerged from one of the. In the lead was a tall, thin young man clad in a violet Taoist robe. Unlike the pale violet robe Su Qing had spotted previously, this robe was dark violet. That dark color indicated that this young man had a very high status, and it caused Su Qing's expression to harden. He knew that this young man's cultivation base was at the foundation establishment level, and from the respectful words being uttered by the crowd, this young man was not an ordinary foundation establishment disciple. That said, his face was a waxen yellow color and he had dark circles under his eyes. He was extremely thin and almost looked hung over. What was more, there was a lascivious gleam in his eyes. As he walked to the front of the ship, Su Qing noticed he wore a white cap embroidered with the character Chinese letter, which meant forbidden. Strangely, that embroidered character pulsed with an indescribable pressure. The dark violet Taoist robe he wore, a robe that could drive crowds of disciples into envious madness, was so voluminous that it flapped loudly in the wind, and made it seem like the young man might get knocked over at any moment. He seemed to realize how weak he was, so as he walked, he enjoyed the adoration of the crowd while simultaneously relying on the supportive arms of 2 cloaked young women on either side of him. One of the young women held a crystal bottle with some sort of nutritious liquid inside that she put to his lips occasionally. The 2 young women had outstandingly beautiful facial features. Their eyes were green and exuded an enticing charm that could worm its way into the hearts and minds of any human. Their long hair swayed in the sea breeze, which lifted their cloaks, revealing dramatic hourglass figures. Their curvaceous forms, combined with their pure beauty, would stir primordial urges in any man. They were dressed outrageously, in sexy, revealing clothing that showed off pale white skin beneath. The garments were so sheer it seemed like the wind might blow them away. Because of their physical appearance, it was easy to overlook the fact that both young women had gills on the sides of their faces, just beneath their ears. As they walked along, they laughed bashfully as they allowed the young man to wrap his arms around them. "Greetings, Third Highness," the crowd roared respectfully. As Su Qing observed the young man, he got the distinct impression that, without the help of the two young women, he would fall over. It was strange to the point of seeming almost unbelievable. When he looked closely at the two beautiful young women, his eyes narrowed as he experienced a clear sensation of danger. Quickly looking away from them, he noticed that, in addition to the guards on the deck of the ship, there was also a group of black-robed figures. Just like the young women, they had green eyes and gills on the sides of their faces. What was more, they all had extraordinary cultivation-based fluctuations. There was another young man on the ship who looked to be about the same age as Su Qing. He was dressed in extravagant clothing, had menacing green eyes, and also had gills. This was Su Qing's second time seeing people that looked mostly human, but were actually different. However, the other disciples around him didn't seem surprised at all. Apparently, non-human people weren't actually very rare. Su Qing looked away and was about to leave when Third Highness suddenly said, "Even though we ran into a storm, it was still a profitable trip. And how could we not share some of our profits with all the junior brothers and sisters who came here to receive us?" As the words left his mouth, several servants on the ship waved their hands, causing a number of palm-sized scales to fly out to the people in the crowd. Being present, Su Qing grabbed one of them. It felt slippery and cold, and when he tried to squeeze it, it wouldn't break. It was obvious the scale wasn't an ordinary item. Now it made sense why so many people had gathered on the shore here. If something like this happened every day, you wouldn't need to work hard to make money. Putting the scale away, he joined the rest of the crowd in offering thanks to the Third Highness. As the calls of thanks rang out, the large ship entered its berth. Third Highness waved at the crowd of fellow disciples on the shore. And then, seemingly unconcerned with so many people watching, he slapped both young women on their rear end. The young women cried out coquettishly, and the emaciated Third Highness grinned. The gathered disciples averted their gazes. Not a single one dared to stare at the two non-human girls while Third Highness was around. Su Qing didn't think they were that attractive, but he did notice that the non-human young man behind them seemed to have a look of disdain on his face. Meanwhile, Third Highness's amorous eyes seemed completely focused on the girls, as if he didn't care at all how the young man behind him was reacting. "Wait for me here, my immortal beauties," Third Highness said. "Don't go off the ship unless absolutely necessary, otherwise Master will scold me. Actually, I'm not even sure if Master is back yet. I'll go take a look, and if he's not back, then the three of us can have some fun later tonight." The two young women seemed pleased and smiled at him flirtatiously. After some more back and forth with them, Third Highness cleared his throat, took the crystal bottle, and turned to the servants and guards. "Unload all the cargo. Be careful and don't open anything." In response to his words, the servants and guards started bringing out a host of large chests, all of which were sealed tightly, making it impossible to even guess what was inside. "Make sure to keep a record of everything, including images. I prepared all this for eldest brother, who's currently in seclusion. He's very petty, so I'd better not hear about any of the cargo getting damaged." Chuckling, Third Highness clasped hands and bowed to the gathered disciples, then walked off the ship and headed toward the seventh peak. The disciples backed up to make room for him, while simultaneously looking around with vigilance. At the same time, tension seemed to build. Everyone present had received one of those scales, and everyone had come prepared to keep it. But that didn't stop malicious, greedy looks from appearing in the eyes of some of the disciples present. Just because you acquired a boon didn't mean you could keep it. People began backing away and then left. Some of the disciples were being eyed by others, but not Su Qing. Because of how he'd killed Master Greencloud, he'd earned a bit of a reputation, and the disciples present were clearly hesitant to cause problems for him. After looking around coldly, Su Qing left, keeping his guard up all the way until he was back at his berth. He did his usual inspection to make sure the area was safe, then brought out his Dharma boat. Meanwhile, he thought back to the Third Highness' enormous ship. The difference between the two watercraft was immense. After some thought, Su Qing decided not to get on his Dharma boat and start working on his cultivation. Instead, he put the Dharma boat away and headed toward the shops run by disciples from the sixth peak. It was time to upgrade his Dharma boat. Upon finding an appropriate shop, he took out the scale he had just received, plus the fish bone Xianxia had given him. Then he handed over the payment and waited for the result. He wouldn't have to wait for long. According to the sixth peak disciple who'd taken his order, it would only require the time it takes an incense stick to burn. While he waited, Su Qing looked at the other items for sale in the shop. Most of them were materials from living creatures, and all of them were expensive. One thing that caught Su Qing's eye was a lizard skin. After asking the clerk, he found that it cost 150 spirit stones. So expensive, he murmured. He'd been expecting it to cost a lot, as he knew that cultivation resources were expensive, but the list price was simply astonishing. It's the skin of a sea lizard in the 5th level of qi condensation, the clerk explained. And it's completely intact, which is rare. It's a great way to toughen up your boat. Su Qing looked away from the lizard skin and scanned through some of the other items until he noticed a large heart, the size of a human head. Stored in a crystal bottle, it twitched and wriggled as though it still had some life left in it. That's the heart of a dragonbeard. It's not quite at the level required for a foundation establishment dharmaskiff, but it would make a great power source for a dharma boat. Su Qing asked how much it cost, and found that it was even more ridiculously expensive than the sea lizard skin. In the end, materials taken from living creatures were all incredibly expensive. After browsing through the shop, Su Qing determined that his savings were absolutely insufficient. He sighed. Round that time, the upgrade to his Dharma boat was finished. When the disciple handed him back his bottle, Su Qing saw that the Dharma boat inside looked different. It was a bit larger, and now had totem designs on it that resembled the scale he'd acquired. Sending some spirit power into the bottle, he found that it wasn't just the physical appearance that had changed. The Dharma boat was sturdier, having been upgraded by an entire level. Nodding in satisfaction, he offered thanks, then headed back to the port district to test out the boat on the water. Back at his berth, he checked the area for safety, then took out the Dharma boat. Light glittered as the boat appeared. It was now densely covered with scale totems. It was over 20 meters long, perhaps close to 25, and was about 3 meters wide. This version of his Dharma boat was much fiercer, and looked even more like a crocodile. That was especially true considering that the fish bone had been put into the crocodile figurehead and caused gusts of wind to swirl around it. One could only imagine the speeds the boat would be capable of when that power was unleashed. Su Qing's eyes glittered brightly. If I had enough spirit stones and materials, I wonder what my Dharma boat would look like. I need to make money. Cultivation required resources. That was truer than ever after the arrival of the broken god's face, which caused all living things to be tainted by mutagen. That made it even harder to acquire resources, and made it such that bloodshed was almost always involved. A thoughtful expression could be seen in Su Qing's eyes. He needed spirit stones and physical ingredients. Lots of them, so many that not even concocting white boluses would be enough. My monthly salary in the Violent Crimes Division is 3 spirit stones. The white boluses can bring in 20 spirit stones a month if I work hard. That means I can currently rely on 23 spirit stones per month. He frowned. If he wanted rapid cultivation progress, he needed 1 spirit stone per day. And if he wanted to buy materials from the 6th Peak Disciples shop, then he had to deal with prices that were dozens of spirit stones at the minimum. My berth costs 30 spirit stones a month. Therefore, I need an income of at least 60 spirit stones a month. But that would only be enough to keep things going as they are. If I want to upgrade my Dharma boat, I need even more. With such thoughts on his mind, he opened his bag of holding and looked inside. He currently had 20 spirit stones left, which was the bounty he'd earned from the Violent Crimes Division after killing Master Greencloud. There are 3 main ways I can get more spirit stones. The first would be to go exploring the forbidden regions. The second would be bounty hunting. And the last would be to go to sea and harvest materials myself. The first method was the wheelhouse of the first peak. That meant that if you wanted to go into the nearby forbidden regions, you had to get a first peak guide. Such guides obviously charged for their services. The third method, going out on the open sea to hunt for materials, was probably the most suitable. Unfortunately, it didn't just require a high cultivation base, it also required a suitable Dharma boat. Without a sufficiently strong Dharma boat, one could go out to sea and never come back. Su Qing felt his cultivation base was high enough, but his Dharma boat level was just too low. and to upgrade it, he needed more spirit stones and materials. It was something of a catch-22. The fastest method is going to be bounty hunting, either that or start killing fellow disciples. Then, once I get both my Dharma boat and cultivation base high enough, I can go out onto the open sea. At that point, I'll get so much momentum going I'll be unstoppable. Su Qing's eyes shone. As far as he was concerned, it would be much preferable to go after bounties than to kill fellow disciples who hadn't done anything to provoke him. Therefore, after making a decision, he sat down cross-legged in his second-class Dharma boat, put a spirit stone into the spirit convergence formation, and started his cultivation. Before much time had passed in his cultivation routine, he opened his eyes and took out his identity medallion. A new voice message had just come in. "Junior brother Su Qing, it's me, Zhou Qingpeng. Was that you I saw at the medicine shop? You've changed a lot. It took me a while to figure out who you were. I could tell you were interested in those ghost-longing horseshoe crabs. My clan runs a medicinal ingredient business, so if you need something like that, I can make some arrangements to get them for you. It'll be expensive, though." After listening to the message, Su Qing thought about it for a moment. It seemed Zhou Qingpeng wanted to earn some spirit stones. At the same time, Su Qing really was interested in getting some ghost-longing horseshoe crabs to use in his poison research. After some thought, he agreed to the proposal. Time passed. 6 days went by in a flash. During that time, Su Qing checked in at the Violent Crimes Division every morning, making sure to get an updated bounty list when he did. He also had his informants start digging around for information. However, there were a lot of people in the Violent Crimes Division who wanted to make money by hunting bounties. Because of that, everyone kept their information to themselves. What little information Su Qing did end up getting usually turned out to be outdated and useless. After a while, Su Qing realized he needed to change his strategy. Meanwhile, a new disciple joined the Violent Crimes Division. This person had an impressive background and was not in the same bureau as Su Qing, nor was this person an ordinary member of a unit. Instead, he was immediately appointed as the captain of Earth Bureau Unit 3. Apparently, he had some tricks up his sleeve, as it only took him 2 days to whip the more than 20 members of the unit into complete subservience. Clearly, this person was formidable in some way. Each of the 4 bureaus in the Violent Crimes Division had different directors, and though they would work together on big cases, most of the time they went their own ways. As a result, there usually wasn't friction between the different bureaus. Normally speaking, the fact that Earth Bureau Unit 3 got a new captain usually wouldn't cause any waves. However, the appointment of this new captain did indeed cause some waves. And that was because this new captain wasn't human. Su Qing caught sight of him from a distance and immediately recognized him. He was the very same young man who had been standing behind Third Highness the other day. Su Qing had noted the look of disdain in his eyes when seeing the Third Highness dealing with the 2 non-human young women. It didn't take long for the disciples in the Violent Crimes Division to dig up information about his background. Su Qing learned from other members of Unit 6 that this young man was one of the merfolk. Merfolk weren't human, but they were allies of 7 Blood Eyes and traded with the sect. According to the rumors, this newly appointed captain had a high status even among the merfolk. After coming to the capital city with Third Highness, he had officially joined 7 Blood Eyes and then been assigned to the Violent Crimes Division. Su Qing had come up with his own theories about who the Third Highness was, and after asking some fellow members of Unit 6, he confirmed that he was right. The other disciples were more than happy to share all of the details. The Peak Lord of the 7th Peak had 3 successor apprentices, 2 men and 1 woman. Each of those 3 individuals was like a crown prince or senior princess in a royal court. A single word from them would cause countless disciples from the 7th Peak to bow their heads in deference. Actually, most anyone in the entire 7 Blood Eyes would react similarly. They were essentially in the succession line of 7 Blood Eyes in general. The Peak Lord of 7th Peak was extremely talented and was famous throughout the continent of South Phoenix. He had shocking battle prowess and was extremely influential. Anyone listed as his successor would be high in the succession list of 7 Blood Eyes. Among those 3, the highest-ranking one was the Grand Highness, who was said to be in seclusion trying to break through a cultivation bottleneck. He hadn't been seen in public for years. However, all the talk Su Qing heard was about how mysterious and deadly he was. When he was in Foundation establishment, he had killed numerous enemies in the same level as himself, and had slaughtered entire tribes of non-humans in battle. When it came to the ranking of all successor apprentices in 7 Blood Eyes, the Grand Highness was listed as second. As the disciples discussed this matter, the captain sat off to the side eating an apple. When he finally cut in, he explained everything in a single sentence. People like that aren't exactly thirsting for blood at all times, but if you piss them off, you'll get killed. Su Qing felt fully convinced that the captain was right. When Second Highness was mentioned, the other members of the unit all looked reverential. In contrast to the mysterious Grand Highness who few people had ever seen, the Second Highness went out in public all the time. In fact, she often went for strolls in the port district. She had a strong personality, was very decisive, and had a reputation for being aggressive. In fact, her temper was such that she even caused trouble for the elders of the Seventh Peak. "She's sick in the head, I tell you," the captain muttered. The most popular of the Peak Lord's apprentices was Third Highness. He was inclined to give in to passion but had no other weaknesses. He often smiled, didn't act arrogant toward other disciples, and was very generous. When other disciples asked him for help, he did his best to resolve their issues. What was more, he had a good relationship with the non-humans out on the sea. In fact, many disciples called him the Seventh Peak's top foreign ambassador. And most disciples admired his romantic flair. The captain, munching on his apple, seemed inclined to offer his own assessment. But in the end, he couldn't think of anything to add, so he just kept eating the apple, a smile on his. Su Qing listened as the discussion continued between the other members of the unit, but didn't pay very close attention. Whether it was the young merfolk captain or the three successor apprentices from the Seventh Peak, they didn't have much to do with him. What was most important to him at the moment was the bounty list and his new method of tracking down the targets on the list. And that was to trust chance rather than show the initiative. On this particular day, Su Qing had the night shift. It was dark and windy, with only a hint of moonlight. The wind carried the humidity of the sea into every corner of the city, as if to bear witness to whatever sinister acts took place during the night. The gambling halls and brothels had opened their doors, and people streamed in and out of them. Occasionally, it was possible to see people clad in black from head to toe, vaulting over walls and speeding across the rooftops. From time to time, spirit power fluctuations would erupt from an alleyway, as if demons, devils, and ghosts had come to the human world along with the light of the moon. However, there was one person who walked along and caused everything to go still and quiet in his presence. Only after he passed by did things turn lively again. Of course, it was Su Qing. Ever since he had dragged Master Greencloud's corpse halfway across the city, his nighttime patrols were always like this. It was virtually impossible to keep secrets in the capital city. Master Greencloud had been in the 9th level of chi condensation, and even though he was from a small sect, it was no small accomplishment to not only capture him, but kill him in such a vicious way. Not only that, but Su Qing had stood toe-to-toe with the innkeeper on Plank Spring Way. All of that went to show that this new addition to the Violent Crimes Division was someone that shouldn't be trifled with. Actually, that was one reason why Su Qing hadn't run into any of the criminals on the bounty list. He wasn't worried. He had a new method in mind, and therefore, he stalked through the shadows of the city until he was at Plank Spring Way. Blending into the darkness beneath the eaves of a building across the street, he started watching the inn. Having found no clues and no information about anyone on the bounty list, he decided to simply wait for opportunities to come to him. Su Qing was a patient person and didn't mind waiting. He considered that waiting outside the inn might offend the old innkeeper. However, spirit stones were more important right now. Besides, Su Qing was certain that if it came to a fight, his battle prowess was sufficient enough that he could hold his own. Time passed. 4 hours later, just before dawn, a figure appeared off in the distance, speeding silently toward the inn. He was an emaciated middle-aged man with small eyes and a long beard. Given his pointed chin, his beard made him look strange, almost like a rat. His small eyes flickered with vigilance as he approached. The closer he got to the inn, the more visibly he relaxed. Seven Blood Eyes Capital City is such a wonderful place. That's especially true of these inns that stay open at night. According to their rules, they're safe havens no matter what. It's so wonderful. Although they're too freaking expensive. It costs 80 for a day, 160 for 2 days. It doubles every day. If I stay a few more days, I'll have to clear out a small town to get enough money to pay. The only downside is that those small townsfolk scream loudly and don't have much savings to take. By this point, the emaciated man was only about 6 meters from the inn's entrance and was about to leap the final distance. That was when a cold wind hit him from behind, accompanied by an icy voice. Taoist rat. The emaciated man's pupils constricted, and all the hair on his body stood on end. Without the slightest hesitation, he waved his right hand behind him, sending a powder flying into the air. Then he shot forward with all the speed he could muster. Unfortunately for him, he was too slow. In almost the exact same moment that he threw his hand out behind him, a dagger slashed through his throat. Blood sprayed everywhere as the man fell to the ground, twitching and gasping in shock. Behind him was Xianxia, his face completely expressionless. That poison powder was completely ineffective when used against him. Ignoring the dying Taoist rat, Xianxia looked up at the tavern to see the old innkeeper standing there looking very dour. "This is Taoist rat, originally from the Church of Departure," Xianxia said, reciting the details from the bounty list. "He's skilled in the use of drugs that cause confusion and changes in temperament. He slaughters mortal citizens for pleasure, and had a 15-spirit stone bounty put on his head by the Violet Lands half a year ago. He's wanted throughout all of South Phoenix." "You don't need to recite the description," the old man said grimly. "I know there's a bounty out for him." Without another word, Xianxia cut off Taoist rat's head, put it in a bag, and then kicked the headless corpse. A thump rang out as the body landed in front of the tavern's open door. "He didn't step into the tavern," Xianxia said, "so I haven't broken any of your rules. Don't worry, you don't need to pay for the corpse. Consider it a gift from me." With that, Xianxia backed up a few steps, and when he was sure he was a safe distance away, carried Taoist rat's head off. "I still need to make 45 spirit stones this month." Killing intent flickered in the old innkeeper's eyes as he watched Xianxia leaving. However, he didn't make a single move, and eventually, Xianxia disappeared around a distant street corner. Only then did the killing intent gradually dissipate. At that point, the head of a huge anaconda dropped down from the rafters, making cooing sounds that made it seem like it was speaking. "Why didn't I kill him?" The old man rolled his eyes. "The young fellow fights dirty, plus he seems dangerous. I have the feeling that unless I used a trump card." "Cuckoo! You're the piece of trash," the old man snapped. "Your whole family is trash. Eat, eat, eat. All you freaking do is eat. Fine, go ahead and eat." The anaconda struck, its jaws clamping onto the corpse of Taoist rat. Swallowing the body, the snake slowly retreated into the rafters. Meanwhile, Xianxia headed through the night back to the Violent Crimes Division. After turning in Taoist rat's head, he pocketed the 15-spirit stone bounty, then headed through the dawn light toward a little shop run by some common citizens. There, he had a bowl of soy milk and some flatbread. At the urging of the shopkeeper, he decided to splurge a bit and bought 3 eggs. After finishing the eggs, he went back to his Dharma boat. He had earned more than just the 15-spirit stone bounty. He also had Taoist rat's sack, which contained 1 spirit stone and some miscellaneous items. Based on what he knew of prices in the port district, Xianxia was confident he could sell those items for 3 spirit stones. This is definitely a good way to make money. With that, he started working on his cultivation. The day passed, and soon it was night time. That was when Xianxia opened his eyes. He had another night shift, and yet, as the moon climbed, he headed back in the direction of Plank Spring Way. Since waiting for opportunities seemed to be profitable, he was going to make the same gamble as the night before. After arriving, he walked around a bit, then stationed himself in the same spot as before, keeping his eyes on the inn from the shadows. This time, it didn't take long for someone to appear. However, it wasn't a wanted criminal, but rather the old innkeeper. He walked right out of the inn and up to Xianxia, his expression grim. "Did you really think I wouldn't do something if you came back to cause trouble, young fellow?" "No," Xianxia said calmly. "You," the old man growled. For a moment he seemed to be at a loss for words, until he gritted his teeth and said, "What exactly are you planning to do? Come lurk around here day after day?" Xianxia said nothing for a few breaths worth of time. Then he looked at the man and said, "I need to make money." "Yeah, so do I." Tentacles began to burrow out from within the old man's eyes and his forehead split. At the same time, a cold and sinister aura spread out from him. "If you keep this up, there won't be a single customer who dares come to my inn. You've already caused business to drop." Glaring at Xianxia, the old man continued, "Therefore, you will leave this place. Now." Xianxia thought about it and realized what the old man said made sense. If he kept waiting for criminals in this spot, then soon people wouldn't dare to come around. Nodding, he walked a bit further down the street and found a new hiding place. The old man had assumed Xianxia was leaving the area. Instead, he simply switched hiding spots. This caused veins to bulge on his skin, and he nearly laughed out loud with rage. Instead, he said nothing as his forehead continued to split, until his entire head separated into 2 parts. Where his head had once been was now a mass of red, like blood, and shockingly it was full of fleshy, bloody tentacles. The ghastly tentacles writhed, as the man then stalked toward Su Qing. As terrifying fluctuations rolled out in all directions, the anaconda stuck its head out, while at the same time, numerous ropes appeared and slowly amassed around Su Qing. Su Qing's eyes narrowed as he looked at the old man walking toward him. "This is a public street," Su Qing said, "not your inn. I abide by your house rules and won't cause problems for anyone inside, but it would be completely unreasonable to expect me to leave them alone after they left. Don't tell me that your room fee includes the guarantee of safety in public." Su Qing looked at the old man. From what he could sense, the man seemed to be reasonable, so he expected a reasonable answer. The old man stopped walking. "It does include a guarantee of safety. You have a problem with that." Su Qing thought about it for a moment, then took out a sum of what appeared to be 200 spirit coins and handed them over. The old man stared in shock. "Since you guarantee safety," Su Qing said, sounding very serious, "I'd like to book 2 nights in one of your rooms. Now you're in charge of keeping me safe." The old man stared at the spirit coins, then looked back up at Su Qing. After a long moment passed, he let loose a frustrated sigh. The two halves of his head stitched back together, and he looked at Su Qing with a helpless expression. Some distance away in the inn, the anaconda suddenly said, "Coo, coo." "Shut up," the old man snapped, looking angrily at the snake. "I know what he said makes sense." As it turned out, the old man was a reasonable person. Everything Su Qing said made sense, and the old man couldn't find a way to argue with him. Su Qing hadn't broken any of his house rules and had also paid a fee of spirit coins. If the old man stuck to what he'd said previously, then he did have to guarantee his safety. Thus, the old man could only stand there feeling increasingly helpless. He looked at Su Qing. Su Qing looked back. After glaring at each other for a short time, the old man sighed. "How about I give you information about 2 people on the bounty list? It should be enough for you to track them down. In exchange, you stay away from here." The old man took out a jade slip, imprinted it with some information, and then handed it to Su Qing. Keeping the spirit coins, he turned and walked back to his inn without so much as glancing over his shoulder. As he left, the ropes in the area vanished. As for the anaconda, it nodded at Su Qing as if in greeting, then disappeared. Looking at the jade slip, Su Qing saw 2 addresses, as well as the names of 2 criminals. After committing the information to memory, Su Qing took the time to remove some undetectable powder from the walls next to him and scattered some poison-neutralizing powder on the ground. After he walked back to his previous hiding spot, waving his right hand, he neutralized the poison powder he'd left on the ground and in the air. Finally, when all traces of his presence had been removed, he plucked 7 or 8 weeds from the ground. Those weeds wouldn't survive anyway, thanks to having been coated with 5 different types of poison. Earlier, he had made sure that both of his hiding spots had all sorts of poison powders set up around them. The old man was infected with 37 types of poison, but didn't present any symptoms at all. Su Qing looked at the inn through narrowed eyes before finally turning to leave. After he was gone, the old innkeeper's calm expression disappeared. Looking anxious, he quickly started rummaging through his collection of medicinal pills. After consuming about 10 different types of poison-negating pills, he quickly performed an incantation gesture, causing the sack Su Qing had given him to burst into flames. The spirit coins inside vanished. "This young fellow is so ruthless. He covered the whole street in poison, and he even poisoned the spirit coins he gave me." The truth was that there were 2 reasons he had agreed to compromise with Su Qing. The first was that Su Qing really had made sense. The second was that the old man had been just about to lose control of the poison that had seeped throughout his body. Actually, the latter was the more important of the 2 reasons. He's so young, yet this is how he acts. Once he grows up, he's definitely going to be a fiendish killer among humans. From the rafters, the anaconda made some cooing sounds. "You like him?" the old man asked. "Yeah, he likes you too. Didn't you notice? The first time he saw you, he was looking at you, specifically the area where your gallbladder is." The old man chuckled coldly. The cooing sound stopped. \\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\\0 Su Qing didn't take the old man's information at face value. After some thought, he took out his identity medallion to send a voice message to someone in particular. Then he continued on his way. The first location was somewhat remote. After arriving, Su Qing staked out the place for a time. Eventually, he determined that though someone had been staying here in the past, they were no longer around. With that, he went to the second location. This place was a bustling gambling hall. Finding a spot across the street under the eaves of a building, he observed the place coldly. According to the information in the old man's Jade slip, there was a criminal named Sun Doing who had recently come ashore and was spending time at this gambling hall. He wasn't human, and was in the 9th level of chi condensation. He spent most of his time on the Forbidden Sea engaged in piracy and related activity. He was quite well known, and had connections to a group called the Sea Ghosts. They were actually one of the most active groups of pirates on the open seas. The bounty on Sun Doing's head was quite high, being 40 spirit stones, and it was offered by a group of about a dozen merchant ships. It was obvious how vicious of a character Sun Doing was. Because of that, Su Qing wasn't going to take action casually. After watching the place for about an hour, he saw all sorts of people go in and out, and was able to overhear many of them conversing. The patrons included poor people, rich people, people who were high-spirited and full of mettle, and others who were despondent and bitter. Even after confirming that there were no high-level spirit power fluctuations in the area, Su Qing decided to stay outside. About 4 hours later, when the sun was coming up, he finally spotted his target. Sun Duang was a fat man in a brocade garment, who looked like a rich old landlord. As he emerged from the gambling hall, he barely took 2 or 3 steps before looking directly at Su Qing hiding in the shadows. His eyes narrowed with. Advancing directly toward Su Qing, he growled, "What a rotten day. I lost all my freaking money gambling, and now some damn bounty hunter thinks he's going to get my head. How dare some pitiful runt in the 7th level of chi condensation come after me? Are you tired of living? Get ready to bleed." As the light of dawn spread, Su Qing's eyes glittered coldly, and he shot into the open. A moment later, 2 people clashed outside the gambling hall. Su Qing tapped into both the sea and mountain incantation and the sea-forming scripture, giving him both incredible speed and immense strength. When his fist slammed into Sun Duong, the man's face fell. He had misjudged the situation, and as soon as he clashed with Su Qing, he sensed the terrifying strength within him. He immediately fell back, and yet compared to Su Qing, Sun Duong was almost slow. In the blink of an eye, Su Qing landed another fist on the man's belly. A thump rang out as the man shivered. However, this time he didn't fall back. Instead, his skin expanded towards Su Qing as if he didn't contain any innards. The man was like an octopus, stretching out in all directions to bind Su Qing. Su Qing frowned as, all of a sudden, a host of water droplets appeared around him, creating something like the shape of an arrowhead as it pierced through the stretched skin. A moment later, a vicious-looking figure shot backward from within the skin. He was humanoid but covered with sticky fluid. He had green hair and a body covered in scales. His eyes shone with brutality, and he had a mouthful of sharp fangs plus a forked tongue. Glaring at Su Qing, he didn't make any further attacks but instead prepared to flee. Staring back coldly, Su Qing waved his hand, causing a screen of water to pop up in the non-human Sun Duang's path, making it impossible for him to escape. "Looking to die?" Sun Duang growled. Throwing both of his hands out in front of him, he summoned a mass of black energy that became a host of vengeful souls, screaming shrilly as they shot toward Su Qing. Su Qing remained expressionless as his own energy and blood spread out. As a result, the vengeful souls screamed as they were dispersed. Then Su Qing strode onward to the cultivator, reaching out with his right hand to grab him. Sun Duang was panting, and his eyes shone with madness. In that moment of critical danger, all of the scales that covered him suddenly fell off, turning into a host of blades that shot toward Su Qing like a tornado. Having accomplished that, the man didn't flee, but instead surged with brutality as he lunged toward Su Qing's neck with claws outstretched. Die. A fraction of a second later, Sun Duang's eyes went wide with disbelief. Su Qing had completely ignored the tornado of scales and had smashed through them like a hammer crushing an ice cube. Reaching out, he clamped his hand down onto Sun Duang's arm. A cracking sound rang out as Su Qing twisted his wrist and broke the arm. Getting closer, he slammed his forehead viciously into his opponent's face, provoking a scream. Sun Duang tried to back up, but Su Qing had too tight of a grip. It was like an iron pincer that caused the non-human to gasp with astonishment. "Fellow Taoistime." Before the man could finish speaking, Su Qing calmly grabbed the man's own clawed hand and shoved it deeply into his forehead. The sound of bone cracking and flesh tearing rang out. The cultivator let loose a blood-curdling scream of despair, and his eyes shone with terror. However, his body structure was different from that of a human, and thus, it wasn't a fatal blow. That said, it was still a grievous injury. As blood poured out, Sun Duang's energy rapidly began to fade. Su Qing grabbed him by the neck, and he lapsed into unconsciousness. Then he was like little more than a corpse as Su Qing dragged him away. The gambling hall was silent. Even the guards outside were trembling. The fight between Su Qing and Sun Duing had been intense, but it had ended very quickly thanks to Su Qing's vicious attacks. And when they realized who that non-human cultivator was, they were even more fearful and even more convinced of how terrifying Su Qing was. In that tense atmosphere, Su Qing was walking off. Then he suddenly stopped in place and turned his head. Some distance away, a person was approaching from a shadowy street. As the newcomer neared, he reached the lamplight, and it became clear that he was wearing a pale violet Taoist robe. Su Qing's pupils constricted. It was a young man with long black hair and extraordinary facial features. He was tall and thin, with a haughty expression. And of course, his Taoist robe made it obvious the high position he held. He emanated the fluctuations of the sea-forming scripture and the 8th level of qi condensation, causing his entire person to be surrounded by a host of water droplets, and all of them seemed to be locked onto Su Qing. Which bureau of the Violent Crimes Division are you from? Give that non-human to me, and I'll pretend I didn't see any of this. His words were cold and spoken with much authority. Su Qing didn't respond. He looked at the young man, whom he remembered seeing when he went with the captain on patrol for the first time. He had seen this disciple from a distance, and remembered thinking he looked like the child of a god, descended to the mortal world. Obviously, he was a conclave disciple from the 7th peak. Su Qing frowned. Although he had taken some precautions in case further fighting ensued, given this was a conclave disciple, he wouldn't be able to use them. That said, there were 40 spirit stones at stake here. As far as Su Qing was concerned, that sum was worth getting into a conflict with a conclave disciple. Before he could say anything further, a cold voice spoke from behind the disciple in the pale violet robe. Conclave disciples are impressive. They're even willing to interfere with law enforcement matters right in the presence of the Violent Crimes Division. The disciple in pale violet spun around, and Su Qing looked over. From some distance away sauntered the captain, eating an apple as he walked. The disciple in pale violet looked surprised, as did Su Qing. Although it wasn't that Su Qing was surprised to see the captain per se, more that he was surprised he'd chosen this moment to show his face. Su Qing hadn't trusted the information given to him by the old innkeeper from Plank Spring Way. In the Seven Blood Eyes capital city, where everyone harbored evil intentions, it seemed more likely the old man had given him information as a means to lend someone a knife and have them do his dirty work for him. After all, a gambling hall like this would certainly be backed by some important people. That was why, on the way here, Su Qing had sent a message to the captain, offering him half of the reward if he showed up to help in a tricky situation. Of course, he would give the spirit stones regardless of whether or not a tricky situation arose. The first bit of information had been a bust, so the captain never showed up. But even though the second clue drew out a conclave disciple, Su Qing hadn't expected the captain to do anything. The captain noticed Su Qing's surprise. Taking another bite of his apple, he blinked a few times, then looked at the uncomfortable-looking disciple in pale violet. According to Section 3 of the Violent Crimes Division's policies and procedures, anyone who interferes with a public servant's execution of the law will be punished severely. This is a wanted criminal, and we're executing the law. We're also public servants. So the question is, are you interfering? The captain smiled at the disciple in pale violet. The captain was obviously wearing an ordinary gray Taoist robe, but his words were spoken with such authority that the conclave disciple looked very uncomfortable. In fact, it seemed almost like he and the captain had switched statuses. Su Qing was more than a little shocked. Truth was that the conclave disciple was feeling very anxious. Sun Duing had plied him with plenty of gifts, and besides, he owned this gambling hall and normally wouldn't allow someone to harm one of his customers. But this was the captain from Celestial Bureau Unit 6, and even this conclave disciple was a bit afraid of him. In fact, he remembered that about 2 years ago, a different conclave disciple had gotten into an argument with the captain, and not long after that, the conclave disciple went missing. That thought put him more on guard and at the same time made him even more nervous. Even more telling, no one on the mountain peak had looked into the matter. In fact, nobody even talked about it. To this day, no one was sure what really happened. Normally speaking, if a conclave disciple went missing, that was a huge deal in Seven Blood Eyes. But on that occasion, nobody seemed to care. After some thought, the conclave disciple snorted coldly, flicked his sleeve and walked off. The dramatic scene was very surprising to Su Qing, and created a lot of questions in his heart about the captain. "My spirit stones," the captain said, smiling. Without a word, Su Qing gave him 20 spirit stones. The captain looked pleased to take the stones. Then he glanced at the conclave disciple walking away in the distance. "That's Zhao Jingheng. He's mostly an idiot. If it weren't for his grandfather being an elder on the 7th peak, he would have been killed long ago. I'm honestly surprised he stuck around as a conclave disciple. That said, I heard his grandfather actually sent him off the mountain to a management position in the dispatch division. I guess he wants him to get some real-world experience." As he spoke, the captain started walking back in the direction of the Violent Crimes Division, and Su Qing followed. Along the way, Su Qing looked at the captain out of the corner of his eye several times but didn't ask any questions. As they got closer to the Violent Crimes Division, the captain looked at him, seemingly surprised. "You little punk," he said. "You really know how to hold your tongue. Aren't you going to ask what makes me formidable enough to make a conclave disciple back down?" "Okay, what is it?" Su Qing asked. The captain looked back at him, seemingly a bit disappointed. "You already took the fun out of it." "Ah, whatever. Since you're in my unit, I'll tell you. 2 years ago, I offended a conclave disciple and was planning to flee 7 blood eyes. However, you'll never guess what happened." The captain couldn't hold back from laughing. "That disciple got unlucky and died at sea. The sect investigated and found it was just an accident, though they never determined all the details. In any case, after that, a rumor spread among the Anpik conclave disciples that I was responsible. Ever since then, they all avoid me." Grinning, the captain looked at Su Qing. Su Qing nodded back at him. "You actually believe me?" the captain asked, sounding surprised. "Nope," Su Qing said, shaking his head. "Then why did you nod?" Su Qing didn't answer. The captain sighed, and felt more than ever that Su Qing had taken all the fun out of the conversation. Shortly thereafter, as they approached the main gate of the Violent Crimes Division, the captain lowered his voice and said, "The truth is that I did kill him. That's my big secret, Su Qing. And it's worth, 100 spirit stones." The captain looked at Su Qing, blinking. Su Qing did not give him 100 spirit stones. The captain sighed, muttered a few more things, and then made Su Qing promise to pay him 100 spirit stones later. Finally, he stretched a bit and headed toward the Celestial Bureau. Su Qing rubbed the bridge of his nose as he watched the captain leave, feeling a bit irritated at being forced to owe the man 100 spirit stones. Finally, he sighed. The reason he hadn't asked any questions on the way back was that he'd sensed some killing intent on the captain. The captain's cultivation base seemed to be in the 9th or even 10th level of chi condensation, but Su Qing got the sense the captain's true battle prowess was actually beyond that level. What was more, that killing intent didn't fade away until after Su Qing agreed to owe him the spirit stones. Feeling a bit calmer now, Su Qing looked in the direction of Plank Spring Way, his eyes glowing coldly. A moment later, he headed into the Violent Crimes Division to get the bounty for Sun Duwang. Before leaving, he passed a few spirit coins to the disciple in charge of handing out the bounties and asked him about Zhao Jingheng. Taking the spirit coins with a wooden smile, the disciple explained what he knew to Su Qing. The story was basically the same as what the captain had told him, although the captain's version was more detailed. Afterward, Su Qing thanked the disciple and left. On the way back to his berth in the harbor, Su Qing thought back to the events of the night. "The captain is strong and ruthless, but he treats me differently. Why? What does he want?" Back at his berth, Su Qing felt more of a need than ever to be on guard. Once inside his Dharma boat, he pulled out an old bamboo slip that he had clearly had with him for a long time. There were a number of names carved on it, none of which had been scratched off. One of the names was Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior. Using his iron skewer, he carved a new name on the slip, Plank Spring Way Innkeeper. After that, he carved the captain. Then he thought about it for a moment and added a question mark after the captain. He'd put the captain's name there because of the killing intent he sensed on him. The question mark was because that killing intent had been dispelled by 100 spirit stones. After that, Su Qing resolved not to worry about the captain's secrets, nor to pry into them. Next, he took out Sun Duwang's sack, which he opened and examined. As he did, he thought back to what the man had said after stepping out of the gambling hall. His sack was basically empty. There were some random things of no value, and that was it. Frowning, Su Qing tossed the sack to the side and sat down cross-legged to start his cultivation. Days passed. After earning those 20 spirit stones, he chose not to go back to Plank Spring Way. However, given how the old innkeeper had obviously used him, he had already started planning how to kill him. It was going to be difficult, and therefore Su Qing decided that he would do nothing to beat the grass to startle the snake. Most of his focus was spent on cultivation, as well as on using spirit stones to upgrade his Dharma boat. In fact, he had upgraded it by 2 entire classes. It was now a Class 4 Dharma boat. It looked very different from the original. It was much bigger, and instead of being covered with scale totems, it was actually covered with real scales. As the boat floated on the water, it looked like a real crocodile, pulsing with a brutal and violent aura. What was more, the crocodile's head seemed like it was alive, with its eyes glittering. That was because Su Qing had purchased 2 solid rock discs to serve as eyes, which increased the overall defenses of the boat. What had once been a simple canopy was now a real cabin with a door, which made him feel even safer when he was inside. Class 4 Dharma boats weren't something that everyone in the port had. Although Su Qing had upgraded it with low-level materials in Harbor 79, it was still fairly eye-catching. There was nothing he could do about that. He could have asked the shop to mask the effects of the upgrades, but that would reduce their effectiveness. All he could do was keep his guard fully up. Thankfully, he was used to doing that. It was simply a part of his life. Now that he was upgrading his Dharma boat, his plan of going out onto the open sea was closer to becoming a reality. All in all, he felt a lot of anticipation. Granted, it was expensive to upgrade the boat, but it was worth it. There were never any repercussions from Zhao Jingheng. It seemed the captain had really cowed him. Meanwhile, the Violent Crimes Division publicly reigned in their efforts to hunt down members of Night Dove. However, the truth was that things were very tense behind closed doors. From what Su Qing could guess, there was a big trap being set up for Night Dove, and it would be sprung soon. 2 days later, after Su Qing was off duty, but before he had left the division, he received notice that no one was allowed to go home, and everyone should wait with their units for instructions. All identity medallions and transmission Jade slips were locked down. From that, Su Qing could guess that the trap was going to be sprung that very night. He was right. About 2 hours later, as the sun set, the captain appeared. The division has decided that the Night Dove trap will be sprung tonight in all 7 districts. Over the past few days, we've confirmed that there are 17 hideouts in the port district. All units from the 4 divisions of Heaven, Earth, Celestial, and Terrestrial will be working together tonight. Smiling at Su Qing, he continued, Su Qing, the location you reported some time ago was indeed a hideout, and that's exactly where we're headed tonight along with Earth Bureau Unit 3. His expression turned serious. The hideout we're raiding has 2 people in the Great Circle of Qi Condensation, 4 in the 9th level of Qi Condensation, 7 in the 8th level, and in terms of people lower than that, there are about 25. The division is taking this matter very seriously. Any unit that takes out a hideout chief will get a reward of 10 spirit stones per unit member, and the person who lands the killing blow will get 80 spirit stones. In addition to that, every additional Night Dove operative that you kill will earn you 10 spirit stones. Brothers, the time has come to earn some tidy profits. This information caused Su Qing's pupils to constrict. If he wanted to get his Dharma boat from a Class 4 to a Class 6, then he needed to purchase a lot of materials. If he chose low-level materials, he would need dozens of spirit stones. But he had his heart set on mid-level materials, which meant he would need something more like 80 spirit stones. In terms of high-level materials, he hadn't even bothered thinking about that. Given how hard he had worked to earn spirit stones lately, the new information from the captain caused Su Qing's eyes to glitter brightly.